December 20th. And with that, I will pass it over to you, Judy, to get things started.
Great, thanks, Mr. Mayor. We'll start with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are on the lands of Anishinaabe Nation. This spot where we gather is the traditional land of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ottawa, Potawatomi, and Ojibwe. We also recognize that this land is now home to the Delaware Nation. This land was settled through the McKee Purchase Treaty of 1790, and we, as beneficiaries of the treaty, must recognize our responsibilities, including our collective responsibilities to the land and water. Mr. Mayor, we do not have any supplementary agenda this evening, and I have not been made aware of any disclosures of pecuniary interest, direct or indirect, from any of the councillors. So now I'd like to start with the deputations for this evening. We have received 5, and we'll read those now. The first one is from Jeff Wilkins, who is a paralegal for the Chatham-Kent Legal Clinic. Housing in Chatham-Kent and the plight of tenants. Since September of 2018, the needs of tenants, and evidenced by calls to the Chatham-Kent Legal Clinic, CKLC, have increased fourfold. In response, CKLC has had other staff helping with providing advice to tenants and recently added a part-time staff member to assist with the demand. Advice given to tenants was normally 30% of the clinic's intake. This has increased to over 75%. There are a number of reasons for this overwhelming increase. Real estate prices have in some cases more than doubled, making it very worthwhile to sell property. Housing in Ontario has now become a very popular way to invest. Increasingly, non-Chatham-Kent residents are buying property in Chatham-Kent. It is estimated that over 40% of local real estate sales in Chatham-Kent are now to out-of-towners. The increase in real estate showings has many tenants wondering about their legal rights to privacy. As a result, tenants contact CKLC for advice. Some landlords try to illegally evict tenants because they know they can get a higher selling price if the property is vacant. Along with the increase in real estate values, rents have also more than doubled in the past 4 years. If a tenancy is terminated, the landlord can easily double the rent. There is very little rental inventory available throughout Ontario, and especially in Chatham-Kent. In the past, the rental unit vacancy rate hovered around 2% of the available stock. It is now about 1%. Another area of concern is affordable housing. Affordable housing charges are 80% of market rate rent, but since market rent has doubled and wages and benefits have not, these rental units are no longer affordable for many tenants. COVID-19 has negatively affected tenants. CKLC suspended in-person advice, instead relying on the phone, which can make it difficult for tenants to receive advice about their legal rights. In response to the pandemic, the Landlord and Tenant Board, the LTB, conducts hearings remotely rather than in person. The LTB calls this approach its digital-first strategy. Tenants without the proper technology find it very hard, if not impossible, to participate in their hearings. The LTB now plans to eliminate the use of faxes to file documents. Beginning in January of 2022, this will need to be done through the LTB's website portal. In the past, a tenant could go to the Employment and Social Services, the library, or an agency office to fax documents and emergency motions to the LTB. With the elimination of faxes, tenants would need to learn how to navigate the website portal, something that will likely be beyond the abilities of many tenants. Prior to the pandemic, CKLC provided advice as tenants' duty counsel at the LTB for between 6 to 12 hours per month. As a result of the LTB's digital-first strategy, CKLC staff now spend about 56 hours per month providing tenant duty counsel services. Overall, tenants now often find assessing and participating in LTB hearings very difficult. Prior to the pandemic, about 45% of tenants attended their LTB hearings. That number has now dropped to about 15 to 20%. The decrease in attendance at the hearings has led to an increase in results to stay evictions and to view LTB orders, further increasing CKLC's caseload. For all of those reasons, it is important more important than ever to save the tenancies of tenants. Once a tenant has left a rental unit, the lower rental cost for that unit is gone for good. The only way to keep lower rents for tenants is to save tenancies. Jeff Wilkins, licensed paralegal and housing stability worker, Chatham-Kent Legal Clinic.
The next deputation is from James Schneiders from Chatham Hope Nonprofit Housing Incorporated. On behalf of Chatham Hope, we would like to acknowledge the work of your office, council, and staff over this past term to support new affordable housing initiatives in our community. The demand of new housing options in Chatham-Kent has never been greater, and the actions taken to date affirm the municipality's commitment. Chatham Hope has supplied safe and affordable housing in this community for over 3 decades. We pride ourselves as a well-governed, proactive, and caring landlord that plays an important role in ensuring that affordable housing is available to 134 households in Chatham. However, we are at a critical point in our history, and there is a strong desire by our board of directors to do more to increase housing opportunities in Chatham. With expiring mortgages, adequate capital reserves, and putting steps in place to ensure that our portfolio is well managed and sustainable over the long run, we have taken a strategic and an innovative look at how we can assess how we can use our assets to leverage a new and creative, energy efficient, accessible, and affordable units. Cooperation from all levels of government is required. Southwestern Ontario communities are experiencing incredible pressure and demand on their housing system due to changing economic conditions and the outward migration from larger cities. Support from higher tiers of government is not keeping pace with the reality, and Chatham-Kent deserves its fair share of funding. Chatham Hope is here to help council make the case. Chatham Hope believes that it is imperative that all levels of government work in partnership with community housing providers to assist in the provision of new affordable rental housing supply. We would be happy to assist council in its advocacy efforts to the federal and provincial governments to ensure that appropriate policies, programs, and financial resources are in place that will ensure the creation of new affordable housing. Equally important is funding that helps to support those in need, especially those fleeing domestic violence or those requiring mental health and addiction supports. Locally, we would ask council and staff move forward with ways in which affordable rental housing can be created quickly and effectively. Chatham Hope is prepared to use its resources to act now. Our board is currently developing a plan to use its underperforming housing stock to create new infill affordable housing projects in Chatham. Infill housing makes excellent use of existing physical and social infrastructure. It also adds rental units in established neighborhoods, which are often within a short commute to work, school, and local businesses. Chatham Hope has initially identified 3 sites where infill projects can be built within the next 24 to 36 months. To raise capital funds to assist with these developments, we are planning to sell a few of our scattered homes with a plan to relocate the residents to ensure they remain affordably housed, which will require very expensive capital repairs in the coming years. For the homes that are sold or redeveloped, we plan to create between 40 brand new rental units that will be available to those with low and modest incomes. The municipality of Chatham-Kent has tools at its disposal to assist and partner with us in our efforts. These are actions that other municipalities in Ontario have already taken. We would ask council to consider these initiatives more broadly and to encourage participation of other housing providers in the development of new affordable rental housing in Chatham. To advance the development of new affordable housing, we ask council to consider the following. Contribute to the development of new affordable housing by nonprofit and co-ops by waiving Public Utility Commission charges, planning fees, and provide property tax exemptions or deferrals for new units below 100% of average market rent. Dedicate annualized municipal funding to support new capital projects and rent supplements, housing allowances to ensure deeper affordability. Relaxing some planning policies in which increase the cost of projects or constrain some sites. For example, minimum parking requirements, certain setback requirements, etc. To reduce costs and get things built quicker, create expedited planning and building development approvals for projects that have units below 100% average market rents. Noting planning staff have expressed initial support for Chatham Hope's proposed incentivizations. On a case-by-case basis, consider contributing municipal land or parkland adjacent to existing affordable housing sites available for new units. Unlike private sector developments, nonprofits and cooperatives providers cannot pass along the costs of municipal infrastructure upgrades onto residents. Often these contract costs challenge projects' viability and affordability. Consideration could be given to waiving these costs or at a minimum develop a 50-50 cost sharing for affordable housing projects. Develop a ready-to-go procurement and capital funding strategy that allows for flexibility to deal with local nonprofits and cooperatives on a direct negotiation basis if the provider has secured land, capital funding, financing, and the project is in a shovel-ready position. Service manager consent is required by the Housing Services Act, will likely be required for social housing redevelopment projects. It would be advantageous to have a clear and quick process to approve these consents for upcoming new infill and redevelopment projects. Ongoing and committed government investments in affordable housing and local support will increase affordable housing opportunities, expand our local economy, and contribute to a vibrant and healthy community. Strong support from the municipality can also be helpful in leveraging additional funds from the federal and provincial levels of government. Chatham Hope plans to invest its resources to develop new affordable, energy efficient, and accessible housing in this motion. We ask that council and staff utilize our energy and experience to assist in advocacy efforts, and we request that strong consideration be given to implementing policies that will assist us and others in getting more affordable housing built quickly. As we have noted, we are prepared to work closely with council and staff on this and look forward to collectively and effectively resolving our affordable housing shortage in Chatham-Kent. James Schneider, Chatham Hope Nonprofit Housing Corporation.
The next deputation is from the Peer Pathfinders peer-to-peer team and Rock Missions. Dear Mayor Caniff, municipal councillors, administration, and fellow community members, the peer-to-peer team is writing to you today in support of the recommendations brought forward in the reports on affordable housing and shelter options in Chatham-Kent. The peer-to-peer project engages, supports, and empowers people with lived living expertise of substance abuse and homelessness to provide harm reduction and overdose response services to marginalized neighborhoods through outreach. Since November 2020, our team has met on a weekly basis to learn from people with lived living expertise who have specialized abilities to connect with their communities to assess needs, develop innovative and timely solutions, and advocate for social change. Working directly with the folks who are most impacted by the housing crisis and the homelessness allows us to hear the firsthand what it is like for someone with limited resources to navigate systems plagued with structural stigma and red tape. Individuals with lived living expertise of homelessness experience barriers accessing services on a daily basis. We echo the challenge described in the reports that homelessness is growing exponentially in Chatham-Kent, and with it, harms associated with failed drug policy, the toxic drug supply, NIMBYism, stigma, lack of access to food, healthcare, and transportation. Recently, several rental properties were condemned, resulting in people losing their homes with little or no notice. Not only did these already marginalized individuals lose all of their belongings and their safe place to go, but they also lost their family, their community, their peer support, their normal, their routine, their memories, and their sense of belonging. These individuals still have not been able to process the loss, grief, and trauma of being uprooted from their home because they are continuously fighting to survive and look for housing. What you likely do not know is that these locations, often stereotyped as drug houses or flop houses, operate as unsanctioned shelters and harm reduction hubs, reaching those whose needs are not met by traditional service models. These are peer-led services. In the absence of adequate resources and supports from government and healthcare organizations, people with lived living expertise have implemented innovative solutions to care for each other for decades. Peers best understand the needs of their communities and are able to provide substance use, mental health, overdose response, and systems navigation services in ways that develop trust and balance, power and equities due to their shared lived experience. Quote, when I didn't have a home and it was a blizzard outside, I parked my car on X street and tried to stay warm. A fellow peer found out I was living in my car and brought me inside. There were four walls, heat, blankets, food, and support. It was a place where I could feel safe and get some rest for a while. That's what we do. We take care of each other, no matter what. That's what is needed to end homelessness, unquote. BA, Peer Pathfinder from the Peer to Peer Project. When someone is displaced from their home and all they know due to an eviction, the steps are to be rehoused are rarely a straightforward process. This is due to many challenges and limited resources discussed in the reports, leaving staff stuck with a few options to support individuals and struggling to navigate a broken system. We would like to propose ideas developed by, for, and with people with lived living expertise of homelessness for your consideration, in addition to the recommendations put forth in this report. We wholeheartedly endorse the need for more affordable, permanent housing solutions, emergency shelter, and rapid rehousing services, and the housing-focused outreach. Additionally, there is still a massive need to support those who are not ready to engage in these services or whose needs are not met by current service models. While the community must work towards long-term strategic solutions, we also require immediate support to ensure basic human needs are met and the individuals living rough do not die in this cold weather. We need action now. Therefore, we recommend meet people where they are, literally and figuratively. Different approaches work for different people at different times. Until stigma and trauma are addressed, a large-scale policy change are made. It's important to build trust and relationships with those experiencing homelessness. Treat us with respect and dignity. Treat us like human beings. Continue to advocate to the provincial and federal governments for structural change, including addressing current gaps in social assistance and income supports that are not enough to afford rent or food. Consider implementing a better tent city, and there's a video link from Kitchener-Waterloo to watch. Support and attend the Homelessness Social Planning and Action Table, a network of nonprofit agencies, government agencies, lived living expertise, and community that have met on a weekly basis for 2 years and continue to plan and implement solutions to address community needs. Support a harm reduction approach. People in various settings and circumstances also need tents, blankets, coats, water, food, transportation, phones, and a space to spend time out of cold and off the streets. This is not enabling homelessness, it's giving people a chance. Support a mobile warming center. Utilize a vacant bus or partner with the local organizations and peers to deliver mobile services to individual most at risk of cold-related harms. Hire staff with lived living expertise. Provide anti-stigma training to all municipal staff developed and delivered by people with lived living expertise, and include folks with lived living expertise in all aspects of planning, implementing, and evaluating interventions around homelessness. We have a voice, we have ideas, and we know what works. We need you to listen and believe us when we tell you our stories. We want to be part of the solution, and we thank you for your time tonight and all of your continued work to support the community. Sincerely, the Peer Finders, Peer-to-Peer team, and Rock Missions.
The next deputation is from Steve Pratt from the Opportunity Villages Community Land Trust. Dear Mayor and Mayor Caniff and members of council, this deputation is an opportunity for the Board of Directors of the Opportunity Villages Community Land Trust to provide an update on the status of the Brickworks, a small home development on Taylor Avenue in Chatham. This unique initiative received unanimous approval in the form of a $200,000 grant and an $880,000 in-kind support from Municipal Council on December 9th, 2019, 2 years ago this month. On December 12th, 2021, the OVCLT, a federally registered nonprofit corporation, celebrated its second anniversary and hopes to be able to break ground in late 2022 or 2023. As a reminder, the Brickworks community is being designed to accommodate 30 small homes ranging in size from 600 to 900 square feet, and a common unit that will serve as an energy hub for the development, as well as a neighborhood community center for both residents and the general public. Delays in development have been largely due to the global pandemic, which stalled the acquisition of necessary financing and required paperwork for environmental assessments. While awaiting the receipt of these critical aspects of the development, the OVCLT has devoted the last 2 years to finalizing a tenure model, developing reservation and occupancy agreements, collaborating with various government officials, designing floor plans, hosting a neighborhood meeting, applying for a zoning amendment, speaking with potential funders, and sharing plans with other communities across Canada who have expressed interest in similar models of homeownership. The OVCLT is grateful for the financial support received from the local municipality, Integris, and Maple Mutual Insurance, and numerous other local business and individuals that have shared time, expertise, or other resources to bring this unique and innovative project to fruition. We take this opportunity to thank Huron Tractor, Waste Connections, Lower Thames Valley Conservation Authority, and Brayland Lawn and Landscape, as well as numerous volunteers for helping with pre-construction property maintenance and cleanup. During 2021, our project received recognition as one of the 10 finalists for the David Suzuki Future Ground Award. Our volunteer group is currently in discussions with representatives of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Green Municipal Fund, Canadian Home Builders Association, Chatham-Kent Home Builders Association, and Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. These organizations have expressed keen interest in what we are hoping to achieve, and despite the absence of current legislation that supports our innovative project, have stepped up to help us get the word out and create something new. We value all the partnerships that we have established and fostered thus far. Next steps in this project will focus on the acquisition of record of site condition, acquirement of the municipality's planning department, finalization of documents with our legal team, and construction financing that will result in permanent affordable housing for future residents, including first-time home buyers wishing to transition from rental accommodation and seniors who wish to downsize. The OVCLT agrees with our local municipal housing department that everyone in our community deserves a safe and affordable place to call home. Our team is focused on disrupting traditional models of homeownership by combining land trust, life lease, net zero housing, and social finance components into small home development that will address a current gap in the housing continuum. We welcome expressions of interest in the Brickworks community and encourage potential partners to connect with the OVCLT volunteer and Councillor Kirkwood White for further information about getting involved. Steve Pratt, Opportunity Villages Community Land Trust.
And Council, the last deputation is from CK Social Planning and Action Tables. Just to note that this deputation has many member signatories on the deputation that Council will see that was attached in the email this afternoon, and it represents over 214 members. Support for community, human services, employment and social services shelter options in Chatham-Kent. Recommendations from Polly Smith, Director. Background and purpose. In March 2020, at the onset of COVID-19, the United Way of Chatham-Kent initiated a call out to the community, asking those willing to come together to address the social challenges faced by the community by this pandemic. The plan was to create a network of organizations and interested parties who would collaborate and work diligently to support our entire community during these times. The network organized around virtual tables, each working on issues related to their work, including mental health, older adults, Mungiddabi, Indigenous, child and partner violence, children and youth, human trafficking, and homelessness, and more recently, anti-human trafficking. Each table includes organizations and people who have a desire to support and effect positive social changes for Chatham-Kent. Now known at the Chatham-Kent Social Planning and Action Tables, our network has 214 members. We meet with consistency every Thursday morning or at alternate times for some tables. And we'll be going strong into 2022. We are a positive and tremendous force for Chatham-Kent, a network covering the nonprofits and social sectors, plus collaborations with government and private sector, covering many gaps in supporting our residents with boots on the ground action. We are writing today as a collective group to fully support the reports provided this evening by Polly Smith and Ray Harper. We are organizations and people who see the dramatic rise in numbers of homeless individuals and families. And as community members, we face that concern with you. We echo the challenges described in the report that homelessness is growing exponentially as the current gaps in social assistance and income supports are not enough to afford rent or food. People are being forced to make devastating choices to simply survive. Additional recommendations is having people with lived living expertise in the creation of a new model of emergency shelter and outreach programs is imperative. Hire staff with lived living expertise. Include folks with lived living expertise in all aspects of planning, implementing, and evaluating interventions around homelessness. Their perspective lends truth and experience to all aspects of homelessness. Create peer-led, peer-delivered anti-stigma, anti-hate, anti-racism programming for municipal staff. There are many organizations who provide such important tools for success, including working groups of the Chatham-Kent Ontario Health Team. Many of those we serve are unintentionally re-traumatized when accessing municipally run bricks and mortar locations. We recognize that shelter options in Chatham-Kent report signals in a shift in the way that services need to be offered in Chatham-Kent. We encourage consideration of the needs for more immediate relief solutions and additional investments for those experiencing homelessness today. We encourage implementation of harm reduction-based expanded programming to include those who do not fit the criteria for housing first model and are labeled beyond the level of care. The housing first approach, while necessary and serving many, leaves a smaller but increasing number of Chatham-Kent residents with no access to consistent safe space out of the cold. Barriers to access to temporary shelter is available during extreme cold weather alerts include awareness that an alert has been declared, means to get the designated shelter or transportation, adequate space with COVID restrictions, and feeling safe enough to attend. Urban Indigenous people experience homelessness at a disproportionate rate and make up a significant percentage of people experiencing homelessness. Statistics show urban Indigenous people are 8 times more likely to experience homelessness. While solutions to homelessness are often seen through the lens of colonialism and one-size-fits-all approach, we have learned that Indigenous homelessness is not all about housing for Indigenous people. It is also a loss of relationship, connection to family, community, and identity. Indigenously, spiritually, and connection to the land is an important piece of conversation, which is often overlooked. We recommend municipal staff work with the Monjid Dimi network to address Indigenous homelessness in Chatham-Kent, as it is complex and deserves a more thoughtful approach. There are 2 appendixes attached to this deputation, one with regards to the impacts of affordable housing shortage in Chatham-Kent on children and families, and also how Indigenous homeless differs in Western lens. And we ask Council to also look at that when time permits. Those are the deputations for this evening, Mayor Caniff.
Thank you. With that, we'll move on to item 11, tender awards.
The first one is request for proposal R21-329 evaluation results. Design builder for the construction of a 27-unit, 3-story affordable housing project at 99 McNaughton Ave West, Chatham.
Councillor B. McGregor and Councillor C. McGregor, can you each move this, please?
Happy to move it.
Happy to second.
Councillor Bondi, you had a question?
Thank you, Mayor Camp. Actually, no, I just had a couple of comments before we continue on with this special meeting. I don't know if this is the appropriate time or not. Maybe I'll leave that up to you as the chair to decide.
You want to make some general comments as far as, sorry.
Well, our meeting tonight, yeah. So maybe this is the appropriate time.
Go ahead.
Sorry?
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. What I would like to say is, you know, before we get on with tonight's agenda, I realize that, you know, homelessness and all the other factors and problems that surround it or maybe contribute to it, you know, it's a very politically popular, it's politically correct topic that we're having. and we're doing the right thing as municipalities and as a, you know, council and the office of the mayor to address it. But what I would like to know, or not know, more or less comment on, is I just think that we should, as council, have a little bit more transparency from administration as to where are we going. Like, these are, to me, these are kind of feel-good things, and it's good. It's a good idea. And it's clearly a problem. And I'm a downtown resident in the city of Chatham, so I understand and I see firsthand the problem that we do have with substance abuse, homelessness. It's in a place it's never been. And I've lived in this home for 20 years, and I've lived in the city for 52, and I've never seen anything like this. So yeah, it's something that we have to address. But saying that, I do think that as council, we should be given a little bit more direction from administration in two things. One, are we aiming towards a bricks and mortar homeless shelter, which I have some familiarity with. I worked in London.
Councillor Bondi, I think these would be great opportunities to ask during after the presentation, the opportunity for you to ask and make all those comments at that point, as far as seeking administration's guidance and or etc. I think that at that point they can answer all of your questions.
Okay, great. Okay, I'll take your advice. Thank you very much, Mayor.
All right, Councillor Kirkwood White, you had a question.
Yes, Your Worship. Thanks very much. I had two quick questions for Ray Harper, please. The first has to do with the reference in the report to appropriate for seniors. And I would like to know if Ray could speak to the rationale for only seniors for this particular build. And then I have another question after that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To Councillor Kirkwood White's question. Yes, this building will be only for seniors for a variety of reasons that meet the needs of the community, along with our centralized wait list, as well as the target groups that this funding initiative was created for. Seniors, they are targeted as a vulnerable population for the housing instability by CMHC as women fleeing abuse. This rings true for Chatham-Kent as well. 25% of the centralized waitlist are senior one-bedroom households. Another 9.2% will reach age 60 and be eligible for senior designated housing within 5 years. On average, seniors on Chatham-Kent's centralized waitlist wait in excess of 7 years for an offer of affordable housing. They are the cohort with the longest wait time, as only 16% of RGI units rent geared income in Chatham-Kent are dedicated to their housing needs, and 6 senior projects record exponentially low turnover rates. Although 16% of RGI units are dedicated to seniors, the 2016 census data shows that 37% of the population of Chatham-Kent was age 55 or over, 59 or over in 2020, assuming no significant demographic shift. Of these, approximately 20,000 were considered to be low income per the census data reporting. From January 2018 to November 2021, resale prices of homes in Chatham-Kent increased exponentially. This increased demand for rental housing units further down the housing continuum. As such, average market rents increased for one bedroom increased to nearly $1,000 a month. Giving affordable housing costs less than 30% of the household's gross monthly income, the average household would need an income of $3,000 per month to meet affordability for rent alone. Seniors in receipt of OAS, CPP, GIS typically receive between $1,600 to $1,800, meaning the average one-bedroom unit in Chatham-Kent is simply not affordable for any senior living solely on subsidized pensions. Given the low unit turnover in seniors buildings, lack of affordable market rental options, and a disparate amount of RGI units dedicated to seniors versus the number of seniors in Chatham-Kent overall population, affordable housing units dedicated to Chatham-Kent's low-income seniors is its primary housing need.
Thank you very much, Ray. And with regard to point number 5 in the recommendation, can you give us a little more detail on how you plan to achieve a zero-based budget request with the addition of another full-time equivalent?
Thank you, Councillor. We will achieve a zero-based budget request with this additional building maintenance person through a combination of the rental revenue for this building and budget maintenance, resulting in no additional base budget tax dollar asked to find.
Good,
I
thank
also-
you very,
I also want to take this quick comment to thank the various departments, such as Bruce's community development teams, planning, building, legal, Gord's finance and IT teams, as well as Thomas engineering and asset teams. And certainly as council for endorsing this project was certainly part of the CMHC's evaluations process. This was a collaborative effort with many hands on deck, and I very much appreciate everyone's assistance with a successful funding application that fits the great need of our community.
thanks very much, Ray.
Councillor Solomon?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Harper. The map that is produced at Schedule Appendix A1, I guess it is, isn't a very broad map. It doesn't tell me what surrounds this building or proposed building. So I'm having a little difficulty understanding who the neighbors are. Can you tell me what public meetings have been held with the adjacent property owners, the neighbors?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To you, Council Solomon. So for this particular parcel of land, this is a municipally owned land that currently has our social housing building on it. And this zoning and the current use is fits the same build. We didn't engage the neighbors on building a building on this parcel of land.
And will the same number of residents be on this land after the project as are there now?
This is for an additional 27 units on the current parcel of land that has 120 units.
Yeah, but you didn't have any discussion with any of the neighbors? Do they know? Well, I guess this gets published as part of the council agenda that gets published, but other than that, I'm just amazed that there's no discussion with the adjacent property owners to build relationships when there's going to be an expansion of this size. I really think that should have happened earlier, in advance of it coming before council for this approval, but because you can understand that subject to after we approve it, then we'll get the telephone calls. I think it's better always to be transparent with the neighbors and and build good relationships in advance. I know I'm not diminishing the need nor the good intentions, but rather you've got to recognize that there are existing neighbors and always deal with them first and deal with any fears that they may have and answer those questions. I'm amazed that didn't go on before. But it doesn't matter to me that it's already municipal land. It's just good neighbor relations. Thank you, Worship.
All right, seeing no other questions, I will put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 15-2. Moving on to Community Human Services, Housing and Homelessness. We have a presentation by Polly Smith, Director of Employment and Social Services, Ray Harper, Director of Housing Services, and Josh Myers, Program Manager, Employment and Social Services.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to speak on this important topic tonight. This presentation and related report to Council was requested as there's a lot happening in housing and homelessness right now. Josh Myers and I will speak about homelessness, and Ray Harper will present on affordable housing. This is about providing clarity to council and the public. The landscape of homelessness has been very concerning in recent years, as you know. Our programs have made progress with the help of extra SSRF funding, but the extremely low vacancy rates and high rents and evictions are now causing major issues in housing people. The homeless prevention programs in CK are again in a precarious position. Our emergency program at Travelodge is likely to have to find a new location by May 31st when the contract ends. The SSRF funding extends only to March 31st of 2022. Further, despite hundreds of successful housing placements, our homeless numbers are higher than ever. And our annual provincial homelessness funding is expected to be frozen for the next 3 years. We are currently looking for a new location and a new model based on the environment today, with the possibility of separate locations for emergency and transitional housing. Location availability is a challenge due to NIMBYism. The willingness of property owners to rent to us, given the NIMBYism they face, is limited. So we also need to consider using municipal buildings or face having hundreds of people sleeping rough in encampments in the year ahead. Affordable housing options are key to changing the housing market in Chatham-Kent, but they do take time to build, and thus some short-term solutions are needed now. Josh Myers, Program Manager in charge of homeless prevention, will take us through what is happening.
The presentation that I'm about to share is admittedly large. It needs to be. Homelessness is a complicated, multifaceted issue. Attention is often focused on the few, albeit most in need, but often at the detriment of the many who receive supports to both escape and prevent homelessness. What the community often sees is merely the tip of the iceberg. We see those sleeping rough, but fail to see the many more sleeping on floors, couches, tents, or backyards. Homelessness in CK is not new. It has been here for years and has been growing, both hidden and visible. It is my hope today that I can explain a very complicated world in a less complicated way, so that you understand the problems that so many in our community have faced this year, and furthermore, understand the challenge at implementing proven solutions when regularly faced with the need for an emergency response. The last year and a half has been focused on the emergencies, and if we have learned anything, it's that emergency responses will not result in the large-scale long-term solutions that the community needs. The presentation is going to start with an analogy before reviewing outcomes during the pandemic. We are going to look closer at chronic homelessness in the community and discuss our financial reality before leaving you with recommendations to consider. I will then pass this to my colleague in Housing Services. Homelessness in any community is a result of systemic gaps and failures across our society. There are a number of different agencies and organizations that provide a variety of human-centered services to those in need in our community. These services are largely doing the best they can with the resources they have. When there are gaps in these services, people end up not receiving the help that they need. And in some extreme situations, this can result in people becoming homeless. I want to start with an analogy of what we believe demonstrates how our current systems work. Picture a river flowing downstream. The river is going to represent crisis. Upriver, we have two things happening. We have thousands of people walking towards the river. And while they're doing that, we have multiple community programs and services working with the public to prevent them from falling in. Unfortunately, these programs don't catch everyone. And as a result, some people pass through the gaps and fall into the river. They are now in an emergency. They are doing their best to swim against the current, but even in these relatively calm waters, many can't make it to the shore on their own. Every year, we have thousands of people in CK fall into the river and struggle to get out. A number of the agencies that work to prevent these emergencies are also working to help people solve them. Some examples include the Canadian Mental Health Association, Employment and Social Services, the Salvation Army, Housing Services, the Chatham-Kent Health Alliance, CK Public Health Team, Family Service Kent, Chatham-Kent Police Service, and many, many others. These programs are throwing out life jackets and nets and trying to pull people out of the water. We also have community groups and charities, faith-based organizations, families and friends. We have many programs and many people jumping into the river and pulling people out. These programs have successes. Thousands of people are helped every year to get out of their emergency, whatever it is, and back on their feet. Sadly, though, many people are missed and keep flowing downriver. Downriver, we have a dam. Think of this dam as being social assistance, and it's intended to be a safety net to give people the financial security to get back on their feet quickly. Sadly, this dam is crumbling. There are holes in the dam and water and people are flowing over it. The social determinants of health, this income is perhaps the most important determinant as it has a direct impact on a person's food security, housing, education, early child development, and other prerequisites of health. The dam does not provide the financial support and stabilization to allow someone to meet their basic needs of food, shelter, and clothing. And as a result, people are becoming sicker the longer they receive assistance. Below the dam is homelessness. The calm yet still dangerous river has now turned into rapids. What happens when someone falls over the dam? Well, society has created one last safety net before people are left to couch surf, sleep in vehicles, or sleep outside. This is where emergency shelters and emergency housing comes in. Imagine someone at the bottom of the dam with a giant net, and they're catching people before they hit the rapids. For some, this net is a saving grace, and it gives them a place to escape the elements. It gives them a safe place to access services and supports to return to housing and avoid falling back into the river. With access to the right services, some return shore quickly. If the net is full, then others who need it cannot access it. For others, this net misses them and they fall into the turbulent waters below. Shelters and emergency housing struggle at meeting all of the different needs of the people that access them. What is supportive for one individual may be traumatizing for another. The final scene I want to use in my analogy is one of rapid, turbulent water. Imagine after spending days swimming in a river trying to get to shore, you fall into even more turbulent water. This is what homelessness is. Programs offered by Hope Haven, Outreach for Hunger, Rock Missions, the Salvation Army try to keep people from drowning. As dark as this sounds, we can't help someone who is dead. In CK, our rapid rehousing team, Ontario Works case managers, Homes for Youth, and CMHA supportive housing programs also do their best to pull people out of these turbulent waters and back to the shore. But as you can imagine, this is much more difficult than helping people from the net, and it's far more difficult than helping people from the calm river above. We combine this with the fact that each support is fighting for the same limited affordable housing, then the task becomes that much more difficult all around. This analogy is adapted by a famous public health analogy that demonstrates the work of prevention. I believe it's important to keep this in mind. If you're standing at the bottom of the river, you're going to see one aspect of what is happening in the community. As I will discuss further, ESS is making decisions based on our current reality and doing our best to both prevent homelessness and end it. But without larger system changes and increased support for preventative programming, this crisis will persist. Homelessness programming is not funded to fill gaps left by other systems. And if we continue to stretch programming in this way, we risk removing support from upstream preventative work and thus allowing more people to slip past these supports and into crisis. We're going to pause there and do a quick poll question. How many individuals do you think fell into homelessness from the beginning of the pandemic until now?
Okay, Josh, it looks like we have 14 responses from council.
Perfect, thank you. And a variety of different answers. Jumping to my next slide. During the pandemic, 722 unique individuals experienced homelessness between April 2020 and October 2021. 533 were homeless for 14 days or more. 205 reached the definition of chronic homelessness. 87 children stayed in emergency housing. And to be clear, this is not counting those displaced by natural disasters, like the Wheatley emergency. Upstream 1,167 households receive financial assistance to prevent homelessness. This is typically done with rent or hydro arrears and mitigation with landlords. 92 receive temporary financial assistance to maintain their housing. 1,281 receive case management supports to maintain their housing. This involves meeting with individuals, learning from them about their circumstances, and connecting them with other appropriate community supports and programs. Interventions can range from one-time to ongoing. Community housing assists in preventing homelessness through diverse programming, including rent geared to income housing, affordable housing, and portable housing benefits. However, the waitlist for programming includes over 700 households who will wait on average of 5 years for programming. Upstream, Chatham-Kent Housing Services assists households in maintaining or finding suitable homes and not drifting downstream. There are currently 747 households on its centralized waitlist. This list is comprised of low-income individuals unable to secure their first rental experience, housing instability due to low vacancy rates and high market rents, seniors on subsidized pensions who need assistance with securing a subsidized suitable unit, families unable to purchase or rent a suitable home given the unprecedented increase in average resale price and increased average market rents, and individuals seeking affordable supportive units through referral and support agreements with agencies such as March of Dimes and Community Living Wallaceburg. In total, 534 people accessed emergency housing since the municipality began operating, and 356 spent at least 14 days or more in emergency housing. Approximately 15 to 20 people are currently in need of supports that the municipality and our community partners are unable to provide. Some of these individuals, but not all, are those sleeping rough. Others are in overcrowded, unsafe housing. ESS has maintained a focus on housing, not because we don't believe that healing and other support services are not vital, but rather we believe that these services are best offered in the community or at people's homes. Shelters and emergency housing are not homes. It's also important to understand that homeless prevention is not poverty reduction. We need to rely on other systems to do what they're designed to do. When we try to be all things, we fail. And more importantly, we mask the larger problem facing our community. With my analogy, I know that if the net is full, then other people cannot access it. I hope that this reinforces that point. If we are unable to move people out of shelter, then we cannot move the people that need it in. Since March of 2020, 500 households experienced homelessness for at least 1 month during this time period and signed a consent to be included on Chatham-Kent's binding list. A larger number reported being homeless, but they were able to return to housing within 14 days, often due to self-resolution. Homelessness in Chatham-Kent, like a majority of communities across the country, is increasing and has been since the start of the pandemic. We have done our best to secure housing as quickly as possible, and programs like the Chatham-Kent Emergency Rapid Housing Program have shown measurable reductions in chronic homelessness. However, we don't work in a vacuum, and we are susceptible to external forces like rent increases, evictions, and other emergencies that require staff to address. September 2021 was the first month since we started recording move-ins that staff were unable to secure a single housing placement for chronically homeless individuals. This is largely attributed to staff being pulled to respond to the Wheatley emergency. Unfortunately, there are a number of things happening that together are increasing total homelessness in our community at a time when we hope to be winding down emergency services. We've had the Wheatley emergency. In June, the moratorium on evictions have ended. And in October, CRB, Federal Income Support Program, has ended. And we are currently seeing a surge in Ontario Works applications. These emergencies and changes take what little time staff have in finding housing and diverts that attention to new emergencies each month. We're going to pause with another question. What do you believe is the #1 reason for people in CK becoming homeless? We've given you a few different options to choose from.
Josh, the responses we have is we have 1 for conflict with other. We have 4 responses for landlord-tenant relations. We have 6 responses for not enough income, 2 responses for health-related, and 1 response for unsafe housing.
Perfect, thank you. The one leading outcome is not enough income, but as shown in the report to council, the reasons for someone's homelessness is incredibly varied. So each councillor with your vote, you were accurate. In 2021, our enumeration provided 23 different responses. The top group reason for someone's homelessness was reported to be tenancy-related conflict. This includes landlord-tenant conflict, unsafe housing, owner moved in, buildings sold or renovated. And when we compare this to enumeration in 2018, this group saw an increase of 161%. Given the current housing market, this explains why many people are currently homeless that were previously housed. By name lists serve as a tool to connect those known to homeless serving agencies to support if they're interested in the supports being offered. The major difficulty is that for many of CK's hidden homeless, by name lists may not include them depending on whether they have sought out services or are in receipt of social assistance. How someone identifies their living situation is also a determining factor in whether someone is included in a by name list or not. For example, someone may feel that they are not homeless despite the reality that they are sleeping on someone's floor. Sadly, this is a reality for many in our community. There are some property owners in the community who without approvals, convert family homes into mass unsafe living arrangements. People are forced to pay rent to sleep in a closet, on a kitchen floor, in a bathroom. This is another complexity to what is happening in the community. There are laws and regulations to prevent this, and CK bylaw services do their best to address this when they receive tips or complaints. But ultimately, we are left with limited options. Those living in these situations are faced with an impossible decision of reporting the property owner and facing reprisal, or alternatively, having the building condemned and forced onto the streets. ESS has limited ability to address this with the current vacancy rate and number of emergency housing beds. We will not support these landlords as we do not believe it's ethical to profit from people's desperation. When we discuss housing placements, these situations are not ones that would count as a success, nor would we pay rent deposits. We do, however, support and provide funding to the Chatham-Kent Legal Clinic for their housing paralegal position to try and ensure tenants have rights and, where possible, empower them to stand up for their rights. Ultimately, without substantial increases in affordable housing, these slumlords will continue to profit on overcrowded, unsafe housing. As mentioned in previous reports, Chatham-Kent is faced with a shrinking vacancy rate. There are simply not enough affordable units for those that need them. When we look back at new rental builds in Chatham-Kent from 2013 to 2018, only 31 units were created with the intention of renting them out. We are seeing the impacts of supply and demand issues as rent has increased at an unsustainable rate. 2021 has seen new developments that are sorely needed, but the impact that these units will have on the market have yet to be seen. The chart I'm showing you compares the annual increase in Chatham-Kent's average market rent for a single unit apartment. This line is red. The green line shows the increase, or lack thereof, in Ontario Works benefits. Please note that by the time CMHC, or Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, releases data, is typically already a year outdated, so these numbers should be viewed as minimums. Rent has increased exponentially when compared to social assistance rates. For many in our community, they simply cannot afford the cost of rent. Average market rent does not include utilities, which most rentals charge separately. Singles on Ontario Works and Ontario Disability are most at risk of homelessness, just by the sheer cost versus income. A single person on Ontario Works receives $733 for the month, while the average market rent is $1,050. The reality is, every year, housing has gone more expensive and many people simply cannot afford it anymore. This broken dam is no longer keeping people out of homelessness. This year, an individual on Ontario Disability looking to move can expect to pay upwards of 90% of their total income towards housing. They're in receipt of Ontario Works, it's 143%. Homeless in CK are not coming here from other communities. Chatham is their home, and they can no longer afford a safe place to live. In July of 2021, there were approximately 1,184 single people receiving Ontario Works. That's 1,184 people whose total income is less than the average market rent. A vast majority of this group is either precariously housed or are hidden homeless. I believe that this is very important for us to understand and to be mindful of when discussing homelessness in our community. There are so many reasons why someone may become homeless. Affordability, however, has reached a crisis point, and it has made it much more difficult to rehouse people or to keep them housed. It is making those who fall into homelessness stay homeless longer. This is making people sicker, which then puts more pressure on already strained health system. One more poll question. What do you think the current rental vacancy rate is in Chatham-Kent?
Josh, out of the 17 councillors, we have 11 think 1.2%, 4 think 2%, and 2 councillors think 4%.
Perfect. And thank you very much for participating in these. The correct answer is a record of 1.2%. Chatham-Kent currently has a vacancy rate of 1.2% according to CMHC. And at the time of writing this, a quick search of online listings revealed only one single unit under $1,050 in rent for all of Chatham-Kent. At this vacancy rate and at these prices, running supportive housing programs is becoming very challenging. With a vacancy rate of 1.2%, financial programs like portable housing benefits or rent subsidies will not have the same impact that they had several years ago, as we need to be able to secure affordable units in order to access them. When homelessness increases, so do encampments. Reports about encampments continue to pop up in nearly every media source in the province. There are nuances in each encampment, and each municipality has different systems that both prevent and encourage encampments. Locally, staff have engaged with some members of lived experience to understand why encampments exist. The main themes that we have heard: disagreements with CKR rules and curfew. Some do not get along with others that may be staying at CKR. They may be restricted from service. Capacity has not come up, but it is reasonable to expect that this is another reason why some individuals sleep outside, as we are regularly full and have waiting lists. I and my staff have regularly heard from those accessing emergency housing that we should reduce the rules that we have at CKR, while at the same time hearing from others present that we should have more rules and be stricter with participation. As mentioned earlier, shelters and other forms of emergency housing struggle to meet all needs. The rules are in place are intended to ensure a safe environment for all clients and staff. We are also governed by provincial mandates and legislation that will not allow us to sanction safe consumption sites, which some individuals have identified as a reason for not moving into shelter or housing. There are no easy quick fixes, but by continuing to deliver both up and downstream services and exploring new ways of assisting those in need, ESS and our partners will limit the impact that the housing crisis is having on the community. There is currently a task force made up of community leaders trying to better assist people living in encampments. So the next few slides, I'm going to spend a bit of time on some of the community consultations that ESS and our partners have done over the last few years. Data guides much of our decision making, but it's not the only tool we use. CK has been a participating community with Built for Zero Canada, and as such, we have regular monthly consultations with leading experts in the field. This allows us to stay up to date on proven methods of addressing this complicated problem. More importantly, focusing on programming that ends a person's homelessness. CK has also connected regularly with ORCODE, an international leader on housing and homelessness. In addition, community consultations have occurred. COVID and safety protocols have made this more difficult in the last year. But fortunately, prior to the pandemic, Bing Consulting completed Chatham-Kent's 10-year housing and homelessness update. These consultations included a workshop with 50 participants, a lived experience focus group with 56 participants, small group discussions with 34 stakeholders, telephone interviews with 4 Indigenous organizations, an online survey with 421 respondents. And the major themes that we heard were a lack of affordable housing, lack of rental housing, lack of mental health and addiction supports, lack of income, lack of emergency housing, and lack of housing with supports. We believe that these themes are still relevant. We have heard from members of lived experience and have witnessed firsthand the discrimination that many face when applying for housing. This was also noted during the housing and homelessness consultations in 2019. This has led to longer delays in securing housing for some of our harder to serve individuals. Also means that affordable housing benefits, which are targeted at these groups, go unspent because they can't secure housing. In the absence of a new municipally owned building, we have little available tools to address discrimination. In August, volunteers and staff completed a number of surveys with homeless individuals accessing Hope Haven or staying at CK. Unfortunately, at the time or shortly after releasing these surveys, COVID-19 in the community began to increase substantially, which resulted in us having to get less surveys than we would have liked to originally. But these surveys did come back reporting that 72% reported that housing is the most important goal that they have right now. 60% reported that they most often sleep outdoors but alone, and 24% reported sleeping outdoors but in groups. When asked what do you think is the most important need for people experiencing homelessness in CK is that is not currently available, survey respondents provided a range of answers, nearly all different. Most common themes are a need for affordable housing and addiction supports. On October 19th, ESS, along with our partners at Hope Haven, CMHA, Salvation Army, Chatham-Kent Women's Center, Access Open Minds, and several others completed enumeration. This was a snapshot of who is homeless in our community on any given night. It is not a complete list, and it's not intended to be. However, it does provide a lot of valuable information that the province and service managers can use to guide programming. It was completed by going out across Chatham-Kent and surveying individuals and families who identified as being homeless on October 19th, 2021. On October 19th, 2021, 171 individuals were identified as being homeless that night. We record many things locally in an effort to continue to learn and grow so that we can help as many people as possible. Chatham-Kent Housing Services has provided 72 new affordable units of housing in Chatham in the last 5 years, but this still isn't enough. Our housing-focused programming is showing strong results for low and mid-acuity individuals. This outflow has allowed CKR to provide emergency housing to over 500 individuals since implementation. And without it, our waiting list and encampments would continue to grow. Partnerships in ESS is a unique service delivery model that includes Ontario Works case managers in delivering housing and life stabilization programming has resulted in strong exits to housing. This delivery model is sought after by multiple municipalities as a way to connect and provide supports to more people while integrating current services. Homes for Youth, which is our youth supportive housing program, has provided 18 previously homeless youth with supportive housing this year. 59 youth in total received services in 2021. We have seen the number of youth as a proportion of the CK's by name list reduced by 60% since 2018. CK Cares, a partnership amongst homeless prevention serving agencies, has allowed CK to maximize what limited resources we have to ensure that high acuity programs are targeted at the right groups. Housing Services and ESS partnered in 2019 to create a local homeless priority. This pilot prioritizes 10% of offers to come from CK Care's by name list. To date, this has assisted 11 formerly homeless individuals with direct access to affordable housing. And to date, all of these individuals are still housed. The municipality is currently delivering a youth transitional housing program, and to date, we have been successful in providing 6 units to previously homeless youth that were unable to secure housing in the private market. 6 youth have access to this program, and 1 has graduated to long-term housing in the private market. We believe that this program was the first of its kind to be delivered by a municipality in Ontario. And given the success of this program, ESS is exploring how we can expand this program to include adults. What we're not doing well is our housing-focused emergency housing does not meet the needs of some very high acuity individuals. Emergency housing struggles at being all things to everyone. There is not enough supportive housing for those that need it, and the private market has been reluctant to house those with poor rental histories and those with very high needs. This has resulted in some individuals being homeless for much longer than others. There are no emergency housing options for people who cannot live independently, and there are growing wait lists for the programs that provide these long-term solutions. This is causing pressures on the healthcare sector needing to free up medical beds, but resulting in people being set up to fail in emergency housing that is not capable, nor is it appropriate to meet their needs. The rate at new people falling into homelessness is faster than the number of people exiting. We continue to hear from lived experience about the need for safe supply, safe use sites, and more recovery supports for addictions. Chatham-Kent does not have a local detox service, and the waitlist in other communities are growing. Emergency housing has always been more costly than other forms of housing. Historically, the homeless response line was used because that was what our funding could afford. In 2020 and 2021, the Chatham-Kent Emergency and Rapid Rehousing Program will cost approximately $3.1 million to operate. This works out to approximately $51,000 per bed per year. According to the Toronto Star, a Toronto shelter bed this year will cost approximately $80,000 per bed. And prior to COVID, the City of Toronto paid approximately $40,000 per bed per year. Simply put, we do not have the provincial funding to continue this program past May of 2022. And in order to find a similar downsized program, it would result in the loss of all upstream and downstream programming. At this time, we do not believe that further SSRF funding will come to support emergency housing, and our future provincial budgets are expected to be frozen at last year's allocation. This means that we are facing a homeless prevention funding loss of up to 65% when looking at this year's budget compared to next. Conversely, paying for housing is cheaper, and it provides a safe personal space for people to access supports that they need to maintain it. Housing is where people heal, and it's why Housing First has gained steam over the last 10 years. The local cost of a supportive housing unit through the Intensive Case Management Program costs approximately $12,000 per unit per year. The local cost of a Homes for Youth unit costs approximately $13,000 per year. Housing First, however, is dependent on housing, and with the current rental market, it has become nearly impossible to provide truly Housing First programs. We do expect that the cost to deliver these programs will increase in 2021 and 2022 because rent has increased so drastically. However, even with this increase, it does not compare to the cost of emergency housing. Indwell has purchased the former St. Agnes School property in Chatham to provide supportive and affordable housing and is interested in expanding to different communities of Chatham-Kent. With support from all levels of government, they could certainly fill a big gap in the housing continuum in Chatham-Kent. As they showed us in their presentation to Council earlier this year, they beautify the neighborhoods they become part of and provide a needed housing alternative. So in summary, we have financial challenges. With up to 65% funding loss, we cannot continue to operate our emergency housing programming. Chatham-Kent is no longer able to advertise an affordable cost of living as a one-bedroom apartment in CK is now well over $1,000 a month without including utilities. How will we fill entry-level jobs if there is nowhere affordable for workers to live? CK income rates remain low compared to many of our neighbors. Social assistance is forecasting a 7% increase to those applying for assistance this year and 15% the following. And given the extremely low rates, we expect that homelessness in the community will increase. Social assistance is being reformed, but at this time, there is no discussion about raising income rates. We simply don't know what impact this may have, and specifically that of our homeless population. Emergency shelters do not end homelessness, but they do prevent loss of life. As discussed in this presentation, with the growing costs, the historical low vacancy rate, historical high need, and the growing waitlist, Chatham-Kent is in need of a sustainable, safe emergency housing program. Securing a building is the first step, and after being unsuccessful in finding a suitable building in the private market, ESS is requesting approval to begin reviewing municipal assets. As the need in the community outpaces available services, so will those sleeping outdoors. It is vital that these individuals are connected with services and are known. Community groups have experience in this and are better suited to provide the service, and as such, an RFP is recommended. ESS continues to provide housing-focused programming in the community. We continue to review what is working and what is not in order to ensure programming is having the highest level of impact possible. Our work is not completed in a vacuum. Staff continue to see rent increasing month after month, and this directly impacts the sustainability of our programming. ESS and housing services will be seeking community engagement activities to hear from residents, business owners, and other stakeholders on how they can be part of different solutions. We need to continue to build affordable housing. ESS and our partners have worked tirelessly to give people a second chance at life. As I hope I have demonstrated, this is an extremely complicated issue, but what is straightforward is the need for affordable housing. An increase in affordable housing will give those that need it the ability to avoid crisis on their own. This will allow ESS and our partners to then focus on creating programs for those with the highest of needs. Every time someone loses a rental, a landlord has the ability to change the rate to whatever they please. ESS will continue to work to prevent this where possible, but we will not be able to prevent all evictions. Affordable housing is a national crisis. We need to ensure that locally it is viewed this way and consider what we as a municipality can do to improve this for our community. And with that, I'm going to pass the remainder of the presentation to the Director of Housing Services, Ray Power.
Thank you, Josh. We need to continue to incentivize developers and housing providers to make provisions for affordable housing. We need to ensure that the surplus lands, buildings that become available to municipality Chatham-Kent are considered for affordable and homelessness prevention projects first, before divestment decisions have been finalized. We need to permit the use of municipal funding for development feasibility studies and other developmental soft costs to ensure housing builds match the overall needs of the community and make best use of shovel-ready land parcels and/or surplus buildings. We need to empower Chatham-Kent Housing Services to determine and offer best incentive programs that encourage the private nonprofit RJ housing providers to continue to house from the centralized waitlist at the end of their operating agreements. Housing Services provides 1,922 households of rent-geared income. The current wait time for a rent-geared income unit is approximately 5 years through Chatham-Kent. 131 new affordable housing projects, which include Nancy's Place, Chatham Hope, Riverview Terrace, Wedgwood Place, 59 Adelaide, 86 Pine Street, 51 Kirk, 48 Fifth Street, 45 Missioner, Clairview, and Villageview projects. We also provide portable housing benefits to 230 households so they can afford private market rental units. While very effective, this program has constraints, as it is limited by the current low vacancy rate and increase of average market rents. The people cannot find places to rent due to low vacancy. They are unable to utilize programs such as this. Housing Services has been working very hard in developing new affordable housing projects over the years. These include 124 units occupied in the past 12 years and 61 units which are currently under development with occupancy scheduled for next year, 2022. Housing Services assist individuals seeking affordable supportive units through referral and support agreements with agencies such as Community Living, March of Dimes, and CMHA. CK Housing Services case managers also provide support to tenants and rent supplement landlords and tenants to help maintain their tenancy. Housing Services provide the rent supplements through 34 private landlords, offering 113 units, and 3 nonprofits, offering 39 units to a total of 152 households across Chatham-Kent. Landlords can get a bad rap in the community, especially when frustrations and stress levels are so high with such low vacancy, leading to limited rental options and dramatically increased rent. We are incredibly fortunate to work with our landlords, and they have been instrumental in assisting us to providing housing solutions to those in great need. Private rentals increase accessibility to a wider range of social inclusion and provide opportunities for individuals to be housed near family supports and employment where no public housing exists, for example, Thamesville. Many of our landlords have sustained these units for over 10 years. With an increased demand and limited supply, they remain loyal to the program, recognizing the need for affordable housing in our community. Some of these landlords have sold a rent supplement unit and offered an alternate unit under the program to ensure the tenant is not displaced. This is affordable housing without the cost of a build, and we applaud the landlords for participating. On our next slide, we have a bit of a poll of how many rent-geared income units do our nonprofit housing partners provide to Chatham-Kent.
Ray, of our 15 councillors, we have 5 that believe it's 233, 3 councillors believe it's 987, and 7 councillors believe it's 762.
Thank you, Judy. Our nonprofit housing providers provide 762 rented income units to help deliver much needed affordable housing solutions throughout our community. They are essential in our efforts at providing housing to those in need in our community. With regards to the recommendations to affordable housing, we need to continue to build affordable housing and use a variety of tools and methods to provide housing solutions to the community. An increase in affordable housing will give those that need its ability to avoid crisis on their own. Affordable housing is a national crisis. We need to ensure that locally it is viewed this way and consider what we as a municipality can do to improve this for our community. We need to continually incentivize developers and housing providers to make provisions for affordable housing. We need to prevent the loss of current affordable housing by making sure that we support and incentivize our private nonprofit housing providers, as well as our landlords that are engaged with our rent supplement programs. We need our private nonprofit RGA housing providers to stay engaged at the end of their operating agreements. We will work with the private nonprofits to develop incentive programs that encourage and support these housing providers to continually house from the centralized waitlist at the end of their operating agreements. We need to ensure that surplus lands buildings that become available to the municipality of Chatham-Kent are considered for the affordable and homeless prevention projects before those divestment decisions are made. And we need the ability to use municipal funding as well as grant opportunities to development feasibility studies and other developmental soft costs to ensure housing builds match the overall needs of the community and make best use of shovel-ready land parcels and or surplus buildings. Recommendations to use reserves to do viable feasibility development studies on municipal properties, such as the Park Ave parcel of land adjacent to the PAW, for potential affordable housing and or emergency housing development. Administration needs to work together to find a good solution that meets Public Works operational needs and change the use of the properties such as Park Ave, Chatham, and Wellsburg properties to meet affordable housing and community needs. Recommendation for administration to review current inventory of land and building assets that may be underutilized, such to enable affordable housing developments. Recommendation that council endorse administration to engage future governmental properties deemed surplus sales, such as schools, to review for affordable housing builds. Recommending a marketing strategy for the municipality of Chatham-Kent to make the community aware of the various housing options available to them. Issuance of an RFP for an affordable build for 82 Talbot Road in Blenheim on vacant land that is currently part of a social housing complex. And recommendation to review the staffing levels to help support more affordable housing developments to align with the growth of Chatham-Kent and neighboring or comparable municipalities and their strategies that best fit the community needs. The Blenheim Affordable Family Unit in greater detail. We have a potential shovel-ready infill project adjacent to a municipally owned social housing building in Blenheim at 82 Talbot Road East. Zoning allows up to an additional 23 units of family building in the Blenheim site. The land parcel is close to a shopping center and public transport. A request for municipal funds from reserves in combination with OFI and COCHI funding sources to complete once the costs have been finalized. With regards to support funding a large-scale build, Chatham-Kent is in desperate need of some large-scale affordable housing builds that would be comprised mix of affordable and market housing that would deliver a healthy balance of diversification and financial sustainability. Models such as these provide affordable housing solutions to those that meet the criteria, as well as those that are vulnerable to the escalating market rents driven by supply and demand. These types of solutions also minimize the impact to the taxpayers while growing and supporting a healthy community. As an overview of the situation in these types of projects, affordable developments undertaken in Chatham-Kent, there were not community dwellings have been 1 bedroom, and a few 2-bedroom units less than 1%. Although 1-bedroom units are still our highest demand, there is a growing need to provide new family units as well due to markedly low turnover rates in RGI family units. As home prices continue to rise in Chatham-Kent, families that would have been able to leave the community housing end up remaining due to unaffordable market rents and starter home prices. This is a significantly increased demand. Households that do not qualify for the community housing but can't afford a market rent units based on the amount of their gross income versus rapidly increasing average market rents are falling through the gaps. This increases the difficulty those in core housing face in securing housing. Providing market units with rents at CMHC's average market rents assists this demographic that are currently blocked from advancing in the housing continuum. All rent geared to income family housing units in Chatham are owned by the private nonprofits and not the municipality. It is not guaranteed that these private nonprofits will continue to provide community housing after their respective end of mortgages and operating agreements once these exit processes have been defined and published by the province. As there is demand across all cohorts and limited large-scale developmental opportunities, an intergenerational community development would be ideal for Chatham-Kent. This concept has the advantage of allowing families and baby boomers to age in place as unit size change when children leave and adults move to a senior cohort, providing a wide range of social and health benefits through intergenerational interaction and assistance, allowing Chatham-Kent to develop a project that will be a benefit for all cohorts on the centralized waitlist. Funding options to develop this project include seeking funds through grants, borrowing strategies from municipal reserves, and low-interest long-term loans via CMHC, Infrastructure Ontario, etc. We have the land assets and reserves in place. I would like to see them put to work as a strategy in this type of community development. I'll now turn the presentation over to Polly Smith.
Thank you, Ray. In closing, and I do want to thank everybody for hanging with us through this lengthy presentation, but there is a lot of important information that we wanted to get across today. So we're grateful for your time. We know we don't have the resources available to solve this crisis overnight. It means difficult decisions are needed. We're presenting recommendations on our most urgent need, emergency housing. We will not move forward with any locations without council and public consultations. We will be back with much shorter reports to move forward other needs. And Housing Services has brought recommendations that will create new affordable housing. These recommendations and current programming will not be enough to change the trend in the community. And because of this, we will be working on additional solutions over the coming months while advocating for increases in support services and affordable housing. I don't think any of us are strangers to NIMBYism. We all regularly field calls, and it's our time to make tough decisions about what our community truly needs. The reality is we have a 144% increase in homelessness since 2018, 60% less funding in the year ahead to tackle it. ESS has asked for funding from reserves to get through 2022, as well as what is included in the report today. Ray, would you like to add anything in closing?
Thank you, Polly. I just want to thank many of our partners, our community members. They've sent me a host of information and great ideas, and I look forward to working with all of them as we try to solve the housing crisis together.
Mayor Canifa, oh, there you go.
Yes. Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. It was very informative. I don't see any hands up as far as questions go. You must have covered up, well, you covered an awful lot of stuff, and we do have some other items. Okay, Councillor Harrigan.
Sorry, I'm navigating mobile. Can you hear me, Mayor Kenneth? Perfect, thanks. Thank you, Josh and Polly and Ray. That was a very powerful presentation in many different ways. The question I have, and I guess it's less of a specific question and more of a half commentary, half question from my own experience working within the health system is, so I really appreciated the river analogy and the dam analogy to think about how it is that we have to respond to housing and homelessness using a multiplicity of ways and thinking about longer timelines. And then I also appreciate some of the regulations that are in place and restrictions around emergency housing. Recently, I was shared some information anecdotally, so we're still kind of looking into it, but I will just share a small story to demonstrate how housing and homelessness really does extend beyond just the kind of immediate needs of the individual who is experiencing housing and homelessness and is something that is a community issue. I've heard that there are potentially members who kind of quote unquote miss curfew and end up in the emergency room in Chatham-Kent looking for a safe, warm place to go. Maybe they're complaining or they have a principal complaint of anxiety or chest pain, which would result in a few tests that would have to be taken. And then very quickly they are asking for a sandwich. And I think that there's so many layers we could unpack in that example, right? Examples of one's dignity, thinking about how the health system is used. But, and so that's been sitting with me as I've, just very recently heard that example in my daytime job. But I'm wondering, you've talked a lot about the very specific needs of housing. Can you talk about how the housing crisis in Chatham-Kent does have like a domino effect in terms of other systems, thinking about education, the healthcare system, and then other community systems that we have in Chatham-Kent?
Thank you, Mayor Canada. I could start, and I would appreciate if Josh would weigh in, because I do think he has some more detail, but I do think there's a tremendous impact with housing and homelessness to communities, because there's obviously the health factors. We know that people are sicker. There's data to show it. Across the country, people are less well when they're precariously housed, unhoused, or sleeping, especially sleeping rough. All of those contribute to ill health, time in hospital, emergency room visits. We also know there's increased police calls, nuisance type calls, and so on. And we've been experiencing some of those things. Beyond that, as this grows and stretches, there's also the issues of we're trying to fill jobs in the labor force. And if we don't have our available workforce well enough or connected enough to work, they can never get ahead. And new people coming into the community also need a place to live to fill those jobs. So there's a piece that's related to economic development and workforce development as well. So it's just so far reaching. Josh, did you want to add anything? Or
Sure, and thank you for the question. As you kind of indicated, it's so layered. And what I think I see very often, and what staff see, it's very difficult for someone to follow up with their primary care physician, or to even get primary care when they don't know where they're going to sleep that night. So attending the emergency room and getting admitted and receiving those healthcare supports, if they get released back not to emergency housing or not to housing, and they're sleeping rough, it's very likely that they're going to end up back in the emergency room. And so sometimes when I share these very large costs of emergency housing, what we're not seeing is the extremely high cost of healthcare dollars or emergency services like police services that will inevitably respond to encampments or respond to address those needs. So it is something that we are constantly trying to have further conversations with our partners in the healthcare sector. We have certainly made some very outstanding gains in the last year, but I also have to be fair to my healthcare colleagues that they've also had some pretty big demands with respect to COVID in the last year. So I can certainly appreciate the difficulty that they've shared, but I certainly don't think, especially when we talk about beyond level of care, that social services or community groups can do this on our own. We very much need healthcare support, and we are very much open to trying to find new ways of delivering these important services.
Great, thank you. And then a follow-up question that you had me thinking about as my children were interrupting me throughout this presentation is to what extent do we know or see in Chatham concepts of like intergenerational poverty or intergenerational housing and homelessness? Is that something that we've observed over time? And is there a risk for, future generations to be impacted by some of the rising and, quite frankly, scary statistics that you shared with us in your presentation?
Thanks for the question. I think that the saddest situations that we come across is a young adult who spent their life living with their parents who unfortunately passed away. And this individual is functioning at a level that they can't live independently. And unfortunately, because of gaps and wait lists in other sectors and other systems, this individual goes from being cared for by their elderly parents into a system of emergency housing that is doing its best to meet a lot of people's needs, but trying to weigh that balance of safety and rules and also flexibility on the variety of needs. Having this individual work with us and trying to wrap as many supports as we can, but recognizing that the supports in the community on every spectrum, the wait lists are growing. So I think from an intergenerational piece, there's that, but we certainly do see, with Ontario Works, that intergenerational poverty in families that are just struggling to survive. And I think that level of scarcity and trauma that comes with that gets passed down to their children, who then also make their way through a system that we're trying to kind of break that cycle and get them started. But as housing continues to get more expensive, it's really hard to talk about employment or school or education when you don't know how you're going to feed your kids tonight, or you don't know where you're going to sleep tomorrow. Those types of conversations.
Great, thank you. I think, and you referenced it, some of the emergency situations that we're experiencing in the community of Wheatley, where, at certain times we had close to 100 residents who were looking for housing, in those immediate hours before, wondering what was going on. And so this has really struck home for me because, based on some of the numbers you've provided, that's the lived experience of a number of people all across Chatham-Kent every night. And so I think of the intensity and the anxiety that I, as a councillor, and other community leaders have felt, thinking about people who are, experiencing the stress of living in a hotel room from one night to the next. And so I appreciate this presentation. I see that I think 12B is where the recommendations to come in, so I'll be very happy to support them coming through. And just want to thank Polly, Josh, and Ray, you and your teams, for all the amazing work that you're doing in our community. I'm sure that there are times that it weighs very heavily on your heart, and we do appreciate it.
Councillor Latimer.
Yes, thank you through the mayor. I too want to extend my appreciation to Polly, Josh, and Ray for your long-standing work in this community issue, which is not getting any easier or less simple. Put it that way. I do. First thing, could I have a copy of this presentation because I would like to refer back to it. To reference when I'm questioning the community and to just process it a little more because it's filled with a lot of information, but a lot of very important information. So I'll look forward to that. Secondly, could you quickly give us an update, if you have it, on the Indwell program or initiative and where we're at with this much needed supportive housing?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. That is a good question. Indwell is, we meet with them periodically, but other than what we have presented in the slide tonight, we don't have any updates. They are working hard to leverage different levels of government for funding. I think we'll be hearing from them soon in Chatham-Kent, but I have no new news to share on that front.
Thank you, Polly. And I'm sure we will be hearing from them. I too am very much in support of the recommendations in 12B and C. I do have some comments, and I have an additional recommendation that I've spoken to Ray about, and April has also been copied on that. But I'll wait till we get to that part of the meeting before I proceed. So thank you again.
Councillor B. McGregor.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff, and certainly appreciate the breadth of the report. And I think that as an aside from the topic, I think this is a really good format to deal with larger, broader topics. I know often we see singular reports come by throughout the year. We have a 5-minute presentation, and they're really helpful updates. But sometimes we feel constrained for time and really maybe understanding more broadly what's going on in the community. And I found this really informative in that way, and allowed us some real time to look into it. And I think that's really helpful. So certainly appreciate the format, appreciate the report, and really appreciate the challenge it's been over these last couple of years to see these issues change in our community. And I know when you talk to community members, there is a perception that that things have gotten worse in the past few years. We hear from some people and they say, oh, 10, 20 years ago, we never had these issues. But we certainly see those trends now. And while this report's really focused on what we're doing locally and local trends, we know that affordability is a macro trend in Canada and not in Ontario. But are those vacancy issues, the lack of availability of affordable housing, is that an issue that we're seeing in neighboring communities across Ontario? How unique is the situation here? And maybe as a follow-up to that, are we seeing action at other levels of government? We always heard about this national housing strategy. We hear about affordability at the provincial level, but are we seeing any changes coming down the pipe to start dealing with this from provincial and federal governments?
Thank you, Mr. Rare. I would like to start with this, and my colleagues can weigh in. I would say that our situation in Chatham-Kent is similar to other similar size sort of rural urban mixed communities. As much as our housing costs are getting very expensive, they're still cheaper than other communities, which has caused us to be in a growth mode, which in many ways is good. What we're facing though in affordability for lower income community members is the downside of that growth. And so other communities in similar growth mode as Chatham-Kent are facing the same things, and they have been for the same period of time, some starting even a little bit earlier. And it has been a shock to the system, and we regularly talk with our colleagues across the province at all different levels about these exact same issues. At the higher levels of government, there seems to be conversations. There seems to be awareness of, I guess the first concern was the big cities, what they were going through, and there does seem to be more awareness that the smaller centers are suffering also and need to be looked at. We don't know what's going to be done about it and don't have that information yet. If there will be other funding coming to the community, we certainly hope that's the case, but we haven't been informed of that. Josh, did you have any points to add on that?
Yes, thank you. The one point I would add is in December of 2019, Chatham-Kent and Kawartha Lakes, Haliburton, very similar communities in what funding we receive, population size, and that mix of rural urban. We are both making substantial gains in reducing chronic homelessness, to the point where in Chatham-Kent, we were at the point of reducing chronic homelessness by 50%. Since that time and today, and I had a call with my colleague in Kawartha Lakes last week, both communities have essentially doubled our chronic homeless population. So although in the past, when we used to be able to talk about housing first, it was always difficult. It was always trying to get as many units as we can that were still affordable, but not like what we're seeing today in the sense of how long it's taking to secure those units, and really just how many units that are available that we can access.
I think it's April Redyke, General Manager. I think Mayor Caniff, if I may, I would like to add that the reports that that Council passed in the tender awards section, when Councillor Brock McGregor talked about other levels of government, certainly we kind of brushed over the fact that just under $5 million is coming to our community from Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. And I think that's important to mention, that a lot of work was done by a lot of people throughout this community to make that happen. $5 million is a lot of money and will house a lot of seniors in our community. And, you know, so I do think the government is getting there. They are starting to acknowledge that smaller towns and rural communities need this support just as much as those bigger centers. And I just thought I'd be remiss if I didn't add that in there in response to Councillor McGregor's comments. Thank you.
Councillor Kirkwood White.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to let folks know that I received an email last week from our local CMHC representative, just reminding us that the Federal Minister of Housing and Diversity and Inclusion has launched a call for ideas for 2 priorities outlined in the speech from the throne, aiming to increase the supply of homes for middle-income earners and to help renters achieve their dream of home ownership. 2 different funds, a housing accelerator fund, which would aim to remove barriers and help municipalities build housing more quickly in an ambitious and innovative manner, and a rent-to-own program would aim to help make it easier for renters to work towards home ownership while renting. In many rent-to-own agreements, a portion of the rent would be applied to a down payment. And the government is actually calling on municipalities, provinces, and territories, and nonprofits and other business organizations to share their ideas on how these programs could be more effective. So I know that one particular organization locally, referenced tonight, the Opportunity Villages Community Land Trust, will be submitting their idea by the deadline submission date of January 31st. So there are some unique and innovative ideas percolating, a number of conversations that I have had with other communities that are also interested in doing similar projects like the one that we're working on here. So looking forward to submitting an application and letting people know what we've been thinking about.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, we'll move on to item 11B.
Your Worship, I had my hand up. There it is.
Sorry, okay, there it is. All right, Councillor Solomon, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. First wanted to comment on my support for the Taylor Avenue project that is really a site that was a brownfield site, and it is in an area that has compatible housing in it. There's a lot of multi-use housing in that location. And also I'm very supportive of the Park Avenue East site, which I've raised, I guess, for 3 years in a row now. And I think that's a good location. As well, today I scouted some other sites that are not owned by the municipality, but are in private hands at this point. Two on Park Avenue West, right near Sobeys, which puts housing near a source of food and an easy walk, and it's also on a bus route. And of course, there's also one that's always been my favorite, and that is the brownfield site that's at Edgar Street and William Street. So there's a lot of those kind of locations that I think need to be examined. What I do, though, however, while I appreciate all the work that's been done by the various groups that we've heard from, I have a fear of unintended consequences. For many years, this Chatham in particular, as an urban center, carefully did land use planning. And we don't seem to do as much of that as we once did when there was a baby boom going on. But the subdivision control was put in place. Subdivisions were developed with the view to having parkland dedication, and neighborhood schools. And the plan was that the schools and the parkland would service the housing that's there, which is excellent land use planning. From my perspective, I can support everything except the paragraph that has us looking to acquire schools, or at least examine acquiring schools, because I know if it says look at or examine, there will be those who say acquire. I don't think that's, in my experience, is not good land use planning to convert a school in a single family home development into high density housing. And if there are those who think it is, then I guess we can do away with zoning bylaws that people rely on when they buy houses. I would point out this is nothing new. Sprucedale School on Victoria Avenue, when it ceased to become a school, it became a worship center. St. Ambrose School and St. Anthony's Church in South Chatham off Park Avenue East became housing, single family housing, which is all compatible with the neighborhood that it's in. On Tisman Avenue, the Christian Reform School that was once located there and is now part of the greater Chatham Christian School that is now on Kyle Drive South. It once was there, and the planning, there was an application to put housing, certain kind of housing there, and the city at the time said, "Oh, we'd love to have housing in that school lands, but it must be compatible with the neighborhood that's there." And that worked very well. Tanzer School, H.A. Tanzer School, which is off Chippewa, that school was closed and turned down and is now Tanzer Court with compatible housing to the housing that surrounds it. Even St. Joe's School most recently is being converted to a use that's compatible with the neighborhood. So I guess I could go further to McHugh School, which is used in a compatible way also. Even Indwell at St. Agnes is a use of more compatible than if, for instance, John Ewan in the center of Birdland were to be converted to anything except housing that is similar. That's the concern I have. There may be rare occasions where a school is located such that it is set back on large enough lands, separating it from the adjacent properties, but that's pretty rare in Chatham-Kent. So that's the concern I express. I really don't think we should be going down that road, because I gave you all the examples of successful development of school lands, and all those lands now contribute to the tax rolls that will help pay for other social housing. But I do think there's lots of land available that would really would solve some of the housing problems. But in addition to that, it would clean up some brownfield sites. And they're in locations that that are on bus routes and near services. So that's my concern on this. If the wording of number 4, 12B4 said that it was going to be compatible housing, I don't think I'd have an issue with it, but I don't want to try to solve one problem, a serious one we all know, by creating another problem. I think we still have to respect land use planning. So I know you can tell me that, gee, every time it comes up, we may get a shot at approving or not approving. But frankly, once we approve the number 4, I think it'll be treated as a direction by staff to every time a school comes available to look at purchasing it. And I don't think that's good for our community. It's trying to shoehorn high density housing into single family development housing anyone who's taken any higher education courses in land use planning would tell you you're supposed to move certain steps at a time. Anyway, those are my concerns about it. I know there won't be enough votes to take that out of there anyway at this point in time, but at least I've made my objection clear. And that means that at least when people hear about the developments, they can decide on their own, the people in the various neighborhoods. And I'm sure they'll express their concerns. And I don't think that's NIMBYism. Quite frankly, it's just good land use planning. That's my comments. Thank you, Your Worship.
All right, seeing no other hands, we will move on to 11B.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to mention before I announce 12B, the clerk's office has added the presentation onto the electronic council agenda, so it is available on the website under the agenda now for any of the public or councillors that wanted to refer to it. Next item is 12B, recommendations to encourage and develop affordable housing in Chatham-Kent.
Councillor Kirkwood White.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will move the recommendation. I have one tiny little amendment in number 2. If possible, we could add and or emergency housing. I think it's, I wanted an opportunity to be able to add affordable and or emergency housing on municipal Chatham-Kent owned lands. I think somebody's already tried to insert the proposed wording, I think, in there somewhere.
Yes, Councillor Kirkwood White, we got your email, and so in the brackets there behind Park Ave East, you'll see with the possibility of emergency housing in the brackets.
That's fine, Judy. Thank you. Thank you for incorporating that. And then I have a couple of questions after we get a second.
Councillor Latimer, will you second that?
I certainly will, but Mayor Kenneth, if you, after we pass this motion, could you please come back to me because I have an additional motion for us to consider.
I certainly will.
With regard to this. Okay, thank you.
All right, so you got Councillor Kirkwood White and then Councillor Latimer. Did you want to say a few things about this?
Thank you, Your Worship. I did want to ask a question of Ray with regard to the first recommendation. Does retention of the ownership of municipally owned land preclude the future sale to private or nonprofit organizations if it's for the same purpose?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, to you, Councillor. That's a good question. No, absolutely not. This does not preclude the private or sale or nonprofits. I want to point out as an example, the most recent affordable housing RFP that I just completed for 42 South End Crescent. I bundled that municipality of Chatham-Kent owned land parcel into the RFP, which essentially we're selling to the successful proponent, which was Community Living Chatham-Kent for $1 in combination with providing funding to develop the 10-unit group home. The intention of this recommendation is to ensure that we first review the asset to see if we can use this for affordable housing development, either the municipality of Chatham-Kent owned or as part of an affordable housing RFP or similar initiative before a decision is made to just sell the asset.
Thanks very much, Ray. And the second question has to do with the RFP. I assume will be issued for the consultant or consultants retained to provide the design options and cost estimates. Can you speak a little bit about the process for the RFP for that particular?
So thank you, Councillor, for your question. Yes, there will be an RFP issued for the consultants retained to provide design options and cost estimates for site servicing, construction, and environmental remediations. I do believe we have Director of Planning, Ryan. If Bruce would allow, I think if Ryan could maybe further add on to this question.
Thank you, Mayor Kenneth. It's Ryan Jocks, Director of Planning Services. So each of the properties identified in recommendation number 4 in this report will need a little bit different process, just recognizing the current or past uses of each property and their location. So if I could ask Mr. Mayor, through you to the councillor, if there was a particular property in mind in asking that question, or all of them?
No, it was all of them, Ryan. I'm just wondering about the process.
Yeah. Okay. In general, first, so for Park Avenue East and Minnie Street, the very first step will be retaining a consultant to undertake an environmental site assessment. The municipality is obligated to meet the provisions of the Environmental Protection Act for the purposes of converting a brownfield or former brownfield site into residential. So for those two, that's a necessary first step for the municipality to identify if any remediation is required or not, and if so, what would the estimated cost be? And at that point, you know, the municipality or council will have an opportunity to assess that cost, which ultimately is a capital cost added on to an eventual housing build. So for Park Ave and Minnie, when that's completed, it would be prudent to retain perhaps, say, an architect to design and provide cost estimates for a build. And if that was completed, then, you know, those designs and all of that information could be bundled into some sort of tender for an eventual build. For the Wallaceburg project at Westcourt Boulevard, there is no environmental concerns there. Past uses are limited to agricultural uses. However, there could be some off-site works that lead to municipal capital costs, such as a small extension of Westcourt Boulevard, including the construction of a cul-de-sac. As well, there, consultation with the St. Clair Region Conservation Authority to determine any amounts of fill that may be required at that property to bring it to meet the flood elevation. So, and that would need to be required prior to undertaking any designs. So then once we get through that and report to council on sort of the technical feasibility and outline some estimated costs for these projects and potential funding sources, particularly the Park Ave East property and the Wallaceburg property at Westcourt would need to go through a public process for land use change, similar to other planning applications. And each of those processes would be at the direction of council, where the community and surrounding neighbors could comment on that land use change prior to any final decisions being made. So, you know, just to sum up, there's a bit of a different process at each property, just given the site circumstances and opportunities that they present. And I will work with Ray and others within the municipality in administration, to develop a very detailed and methodical work plan for each of these properties that council can consider over the next several months. Thank you.
I appreciate the answer, Ryan. I'm just thinking about the urgency of what we've been talking about all night. And, you know, these things take time, as I'm well aware from working on our other little project. So is there any anticipated expectation about timing, and which comes first in the order of the three?
That's a good question. All three will start at the same time. I believe the Wallaceburg Westcourt has the opportunity to move forward to a complete feasibility study more quickly, only because there's no environmental investigations required at that particular property. But I would also like to add that over the last several months, internal with Ray's group and others in the organization, some of the groups that he mentioned in finance and infrastructure and engineering services have been proactively identifying municipal properties for housing opportunities. And those efforts in part did lead to what council approved tonight in terms of the build at 99 McNaughton. And it also resulted in part in proceeding potentially with the RFP for a design and build at the McGeorge Street property in Blenheim, sorry. So, taken all in, some of the efforts have already resulted in some projects and will likely result in another one in a shorter time frame. And then hopefully, 1, 2, or 3 more projects can be brought before council in 2022. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Ryan. Appreciate it.
Okay, we got Councillor Latimer, followed by Councillor Hall, followed by Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, through the mayor. Sorry, is that me? Ryan, I wanted to ask you another question, and it kind of builds off of what Councillor Solomon said. The term inclusionary zoning, what does that mean? And what does it mean for us as a municipality? And what are the plans to utilize this? I know there's a provincial directive either coming or is already out there. And would it include things like what you've already done for us, like proactively identifying potential properties that could be developed for more dense housing? And it really, I'm wondering how they're handling like land zoning and planning that has been done historically.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Inclusionary zoning is an opportunity under provincial legislation, being the Planning Act, to require developers in areas where inclusionary zoning regulations exist to provide affordable housing. Inclusionary zoning still has very limited area of application under the Planning Act. So in simple terms, it would be very difficult to do so here in Chatham-Kent based on the current provincial legislation and regulations. Inclusionary zoning is currently only geared toward major urban centers in Ontario, in the Greater Toronto area, and also in areas that are within a certain distance of what's defined under the growth plan for Ontario as a protected major transit station area. And Chatham-Kent is not within what the province defines as its growth plan, which is mainly the Greater Golden Horseshoe area and its peripheral area. So this legislation was introduced by the previous provincial Liberal government a few years ago. It was amended actually through Bill 108, the More Homes, More Choices Act, to have a more limited application. And administration can provide more information on that, but in short, inclusionary zoning is not a good option or even an available option here in Chatham-Kent to use for this purpose.
Thank you for that clarification, Ryan, because I've been asked about that and I didn't understand the term myself. So thank you very much.
Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Just one quick question to maybe Ray or Ryan. Am I correct in presuming in reading the reports? So the Blenheim site is essentially pretty much, I think that Ray alluded, is shovel ready. And I just wanted to see when these projects start to maybe becoming available to go ahead. Are you going to do like a calculation or a ranking order in regards to the needs in those communities? I know that the visual is this Chatham requires, these funding aspects maybe a little bit more substantially and prompter, but I can definitely say there's a real big need in our community as well in South Kent to look at these builds. And I'm just looking to see, like, how would you kind of rank them once they do start coming in?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To you, Councillor Sakachi. Thank you for your question. So the ranking of the projects would be a combination of both quantitative and qualitative. So in terms of quantitative, our analysis would be what our centralized wait list would be, that dictates what our greatest needs are. But like you'd mentioned, all the communities are in need of affordable housing. So the data would say build everything in Chatham according to the waitlist numbers and secondarily Wallsburg. We can't take that approach. We can't just just build affordable housing in Chatham. We have to make sure we're a community of communities, and we have to take care of all the communities. And that's why we've got affordable housing builds such as the one going on in Richtown right now, and certainly Villaview and Blenheim. And we're in this together. Chatham-Kent's affordable housing crisis is not unique. The other communities are having to deal with it as well, and they're taking similar approaches. So certainly those decisions will be made with a whole bunch of different data sets to make those decisions. Like I said, data driven, qualitative, funding. The funding considerations is certainly, as well as zoning, feasibility, infrastructure. There's a whole host of information that would be used to basically create a matrix and determine which projects that we would go after first. And also, it's also important for us to stay agile, as some funding is time restricted. So we, in some situations, similarly to the Rapid Housing Initiative that Council just has previously approved, we are under some time constraints to make use of those funding. So we certainly won't want to miss any funding opportunities because we weren't ready to act.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harper. I really greatly appreciate how you responded to that, because that was one of my biggest concerns as regards to the data that's collected, if it's going to be utilized just in those areas, because it's very obvious where it's going to show the greatest need is. And I just wanted to make sure that all the areas around there are taken in consideration. My next question will go somewhat towards, I'm not sure, is Mr. McAllister on the line? Sorry.
I'm here, Your Worship.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. I apologize for not presenting this question to you prior, but I did some reading while I was preparing for this meeting. I see a lot of municipalities are not a lot, but some municipalities are when they're doing some of the CIP programs and that, and they're giving these incentives for buildings to come into municipalities. They're also structuring some of them that they're responsible to do some affordable housing as well. And it doesn't have to be necessarily in that build, but it could be in a different part, of the municipality, or different part of the urban areas. Is that something that you think that we could look at as well?
Thank you, Your Worship. So we currently do have affordable housing incentives in our current CIP that's going to be up for review here shortly, whether or not there's some tweaks we can do to it to further encourage affordable housing. But right now, fundamentally defined affordable housing is eligible for our property tax increment grant up to 10 years at 100%. It's eligible for a number of other incentives, waiving of fees, the development charges, those things that were brought up in the one letter right now. Now that's specific to rental affordable housing as defined right now. To your other question, I think what you're potentially referring to is what's referred to as not so much a CIP, but it's another provision in the Planning Act called density bonusing, essentially what it's called. Again, I think that's a tough concept to use in a Chatham-Kent, just because it's really what you're trying to do is allow more density at one location and grant a developer the right for some benefit somewhere else. At this point in time, I don't know, we're at the stage where we're approving what I'll call very high density type developments here in Chatham-Kent yet to consider that option. But I think that's that piece. But certainly, there's always options to look at other potential incentives on the affordable housing front. I would suggest right now ours are about as aggressive as I've seen. But it may be balancing it against some of the other things that we're incenting in that CIP too, to make it even more of a carrot, so to speak. So.
Thank you. And my last question is just going to be directed somewhat towards, I guess, to Ray and maybe Mr. Quinton. So Mr. Harper, so essentially, if there's some the possibilities for us to do some blended units as well, where it's a mixture of market rent as well as affordable housing, and maybe make these units self-sustainable, that we're able to go out as a break-even point. is there a possibility of us as kind of being the lender towards our own projects and essentially borrowing from some of the reserves? This is a part that goes to Mr. Quinn, that we can borrow towards the reserves in, similar like we did with other projects that I won't mention. To borrow from the reserves and pay it back like that. Is there the opportunity to do that in a blended kind of like a hybrid area, so we're actually sustaining the building itself?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I'll go first, and Ray, add on any other thoughts that you have. So it's Gord Quinton, Chief Financial Officer speaking. Right now we do have a base budget of $1 million annually going into affordable housing reserve that would be available to help with some upcoming builds, but eventually that pot runs dry, and then we have to wait a few more years until there's enough money in it again, till we have enough in it to award another project. Council could always make the decision to say the need is so great now, or in the immediate term, that we would rather borrow funds either from other reserves or actual issue a debenture externally to basically advance the timing of those builds to address the current situation and amortize the debenture costs over a 20-year period, for example. Right now we're at historically low interest rates, and although I do expect them to go up, a few points in 2022 and 2023, I don't think we're going back to the high interest rate worlds that over the next couple of years, if council exhausted the current housing reserves and wanted to sort of advance build even more, that always would be an option of council to consider.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn. And I did have a conversation with Ray prior to the meeting, and in seeing what's in those reserves, I don't foresee it. Although it's nice, I just don't foresee it large enough to make a large dent in it. My biggest concern, and this will be my last comment, is my biggest concern is that, as everybody knows, if you look at not just the cost and rise in inflation, but if you especially look at the rise in inflation to construction costs, the longer we wait, the less we're going to get for our money. It could be a formula which could be even more, make us more worse off with interest rates even rising a little bit. If you're talking, a small percentile, worth a couple $1 million, that's noticeable. You're talking 5 to 10, which is going to get you less. It's even more noticeable. So I guess my biggest concern is that the longer we wait, the more it's going to cost us and the less we're going to get for that money. If the trajectory stays similar of what construction costs are going to be, we've seen that with our road budget here this year, having to approve more money. I think that it's going to put us in a position where, down the road, not for maybe this council, but for other council members that are, it's going to be a harder decision, because it's going to be, like I said, way less bang for your buck. So I think that we need to look at all aspects. And although it might be very, very tough decisions now, the need is great. And I think that by making these hard decisions now, it is still going to give our municipality more for their money the sooner that we do it. So that's just my finishing comments. Thank you, Mayor Caniff.
All right, seeing no other questions, we'll put this to vote. Councillor B. McGregor.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Just had a couple comments. I do appreciate the recommendations, and I think it's really good to see that we can be focused on not missing opportunities to use infill and densification, and we know that those things are helpful when we're looking at cost reduction, whether that's filling those spaces with affordable housing or other types of development. The one thing I think that we should be cognizant of as we look at the outcomes of this process, and we think about things like neighborhood compatibility or character of homes, is we mentioned inclusionary zoning, but there's a pretty rich history in Ontario and Canada and North America of exclusionary zoning. And that's the concept of using zoning to keep neighborhoods the way they are and prevent certain types of people from inhabiting those neighborhoods. So I think that to break out of that mold is really important, and looking at options of multi-family homes, looking at where affordable housing goes in sort of non-traditional spaces is important. And I think it's also important to recognize that that's not a call from one side of the political spectrum. You've got the Ontario Realty Association, perhaps the loudest voice in ending single-family exclusionary zoning to deal with this affordability crisis. So I really think that when we think about good land use planning, we got to remember that that's evolved greatly over the past few decades. And the types of things that we're looking to do here, I think, are consistent with that newer, better approach. And we have to make sure that we're willing to do them, not just with these type of projects, but when we see other type of projects come forward and we really dig into dealing with this affordability crisis. Thank you.
All right, we'll put it to vote now.
Council, I'm just waiting for one more vote. All votes are in. Motion passes 16-0.
All right, Councillor Latimer, I'll go to you. You had another motion that was consistent with what we just went through.
Thank you, through the mayor. We've heard Chatham-Kent is obviously acting on several initiatives currently that contribute to providing housing for all in Chatham-Kent. And the growth strategy definitely identifies broad goals for housing and employment growth in the community. And a number of growth strategy related initiatives are ongoing and under development. So these strategies are obviously achieving success, bring different housing types or different people to the community. And one affordable housing Chatham-Kent is implementing is the 2020-2024 Housing and Homelessness Plan, which again it lists several strategies and actionable items within that plan that promote partnerships within the housing sector, both private and not-for-profit. And especially Councillor Kirkwood White brought the announcement from the Federal Minister of Housing, Hudson, who met with our mayor and other mayors of Ontario at the Housing Roundtable last week, stating that he's looking for pilots of how home ownership should work in Ontario communities, specifically rent to own. He also shared proposed funding to increase the federal co-investment fund, inviting municipalities to propose innovative pilots under the Acceleration Housing Fund. So I think this is an opportunity for our community to come together and collaborate and plan. And so I've spoken with Mr. Harper, and also April, Dr. Redak is aware of this. And I would look, hearing even the ideas that other councillors have brought forth this evening, I would really like to direct administration to investigate current and new private and not-for-profit community partnerships to develop additional measures that address market housing supply and affordability that coincides with Chatham-Kent's housing and homelessness plan that addresses housing for all in our community. This plan will address delayed home ownership for singles and young families, limited economic growth and labor supply, increased percentages of household spending on housing, inability of households to transition out of subsidized housing, all of which assists with addressing increased incidence of homelessness. These effective housing partnerships will include an affordable housing mentorship program that involves both the private and not-for-profit sector and pilots such as rent-to-own home ownership that could work in the Chatham-Kent community, with an RTC to return to council by May 30th of 2022. I'm very concerned with where we are, like in a locked gridiron across the whole housing continuum, right from homelessness to you're older and you own a beautiful home and you can't sell it. buy a home and downsize and buy a home that meets your needs. Everyone's kind of locked into things. So, and we have a lot of partnerships that we've already developed. There are people out there that are asking us how they can help with affordable housing. And so I see this as just kind of, it complements the recommendations that Ray has already put and the whole housing team have put in front of us this evening. But this specifically addresses how it all works within the whole plan and how it works to free up housing options across the whole continuum, and how in a lot of cases we don't have to be the driver of that. And I appreciated Councillor Kirkwood White's question earlier with, just because we provide the seed money or we start the initiative, does that preclude other organizations from purchasing that project or continuing on? I really don't feel that we need to own all of this. We do need to enable it. We need to direct it. We need to be able to access the government funding that's out there, but we don't have to necessarily be the driver. So that's what I'll be looking for in the report. If I can get a seconder for this
Can I get a seconder for that? Councillor Finn?
I would be happy to second this one.
All right. Councillor Latimer, anything else to say before I open it up
Nope.
to the board? Any other questions?
I think I'll leave it for now.
All right. Any other questions? Councillor Latimer, you must have explained it really well because there's no, we had a couple flashes up there. Councillor Harrigan, do you have a question or was that a slip of the finger?
No, thank you, Mayor Kenneth. Sorry, I lowered it too quickly because I thought you saw it. I guess the question that I have is to staff, because some of what I see in Councillor Latimer's motion was referenced in the presentation that we had just received, particularly around the concept of young families and economic growth and labor supply and how housing is within that. So maybe through to April or Polly, I'm just wondering if if you are feeling like this is in addition to what was presented, and if you have more to come back, because I'm happy to have more conversation about housing. What I am mindful of though is the workload of the areas that would be tasked with doing this report.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I think for us, and certainly Polly can comment as well, housing is such a huge issue to tackle that whenever we can pull people together, whenever we can look at the entire housing continuum, that includes folks that are not only in community human services, in housing services and our employment and social services. And so I think that's, and certainly I can't put words in Councillor Latimer's mouth, but I think that's what Councillor Latimer is getting at, that we have a housing issue in the entire housing continuum. So while we are very focused on emergency housing, transitional housing, supportive housing, and affordable housing, there's a lot more housing out there. And how do we bring everyone together to assist with a number of the things that she's listed in this recommendation? So, everybody is kind of taxed. Everybody's got lots of work to do, but housing's really important to our team. It's really important to Bruce's team in terms of the growth strategy. And I think if that's where Councillor Latimer was leaning, that's my understanding of bringing these groups together and looking at kind of all of our private, all our nonprofit, us, as well as everybody that is in the business of housing, then I think it's time well spent. I don't know if that helps Councillor Harrigan or not. And certainly Councillor Latimer, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, thank you, April. I appreciate the comments and absolutely agree. There's, as I had said earlier, many layers to the conversation about housing in CK.
All right, seeing no other questions, we'll put it to vote.
Okay, all votes are in. Motion passes 16-1. And moving on to 12C, shelter options in Chatham-Kent.
Councillor Kirkwood White and Councillor Crew, can I get you move this, please?
So moved, Your Worship.
I'll second it.
I have a one tiny modification, Your Worship, if you don't mind. Okay.
Yeah, what is it?
I had suggested that we add under the first part of the recommendation that administration review current available buildings, including municipally owned buildings and or land, and provide a report to council on so and so and so and so. And that is because I wanted to leave the door open for the possibility of some other structure to be created and or suggested by private sector or nonprofit.
Councillor Crew, you okay with that? I should have stayed with Councillor Kirkwood White on that amendment, but Councillor Crew, you okay with adding that?
Yes, I am.
Perfect. Okay, Councillor Kirkwood White, do you have any other comments about it, or?
No, that's it. And then I have a couple of more comments about some of the other things that are part of this motion as well.
All right, well, this is your opportunity. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm just wondering about the report speaks to an RFP being issued for an outside organization to provide housing focused outreach services. And I'm wondering if Polly could just give us a little more of an elaboration on how the successful proponent might work with employment and social services. I think it would be interesting for council members and those listening in to hear a little bit more about the services offered by org code, which was referenced earlier in Ray's report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, the RFP has not yet been developed. Org code has done work for this municipality as a consultant, but also with the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. And they would assist us in developing that based on best practices and an evidence-informed approach. There's many ways to do outreach. So we will be looking at housing-focused outreach, and we want to make sure that people can return to housing as soon as possible. Recognizing it doesn't happen quickly and they do have other needs in the meantime. We don't only help with housing placements, of course. We have a variety of supportive services, including case management functions of income maintenance, referrals, service navigation, employment, etc., to all people in need. Everything would be outlined in the RFP, and community groups can, at that point, they could certainly work with us for more information and ask questions, and then that information is shared publicly, and then they can decide if they're interested in submitting. We have had interest in moving certain aspects out, and I want to say in the beginning we were looking for community groups to help us in the early days of the pandemic with the Bradley Center, and at that time there wasn't the capacity, but we're hoping that as things have I don't want to say stabilized, that's the wrong word, completely wrong word. But as we have worked together and we work through a lot of this, that there's some interest. We think that there's probably some interest and capacity that's been built.
Thank you very much, Polly. And I really do want to commend the staff for acknowledging that this situation that we're hoping to address really needs everyone in our community engaged, and especially those, and we've heard this several times tonight, those with lived experience, and those that are on the by name list as well. The other thing that I wanted to mention, despite the fact that there's no law that precludes people from visiting or moving to Chatham-Kent, I want to thank both you and Ray for clearing up the misconception that many of the homeless folks that we're dealing with are from out of town. These are our Chatham-Kent residents that we're hoping to help. So thank you very much for clarifying that.
Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mayor Cannon. Just for some clarity, is this motion recommendation, is this leading us into the idea that Chatham-Kent will build a homeless shelter? If somebody could declare like a bricks and mortar permanent structure, not that I'm for or against, but just the answer to that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The first point to look at available buildings that are municipally owned, we're also working with a realtor. We are looking for a building to move from our current location, because we only have this location at Travelodge until May 31st. So it is imperative that we find another location for people. We have every night 45 people there, 60 that we're providing emergency housing to on average. And when we have to leave there, we have to have somewhere for them to go. So most definitely we are looking at renting, and we're looking for something that's sustainable and affordable.
And thank you, through you, Mayor Kent. Polly, so just so that, I and the public understand, forever, really, our policy is to not have a bricks and mortar homeless shelter in Chatham. There's one in London, which I referenced earlier. I worked at when I was in university, and so I'm pretty familiar with the way these places work, and they work very well in that larger community. But so now, and I've spoken to a couple of realtors, and I know that the municipality has endeavored to investigate some different properties. So just so that we're clear, we are now, by passing this and approving this motion recommendation, we are now going to enter into a permanent homeless shelter in Chatham. And there's that, whether that passes or not, we'll see in a couple of minutes. But if that is the case, will that be run and funded by, well, it would be funded by the municipality, obviously, but would it be run by municipal employees, new municipal employees? And will that create a new department within the municipality? Because currently, for people that are tuning in, we're usually, I think, and you can correct me, I think what we're doing now is we're using local hotels to house people in the hopes that they graduate to permanent housing. So we're using local hotels, smaller motels. Grand Avenue East, I think, is probably the most popular destination. We would leave that, we would go towards a permanent bricks and mortar situation. And would this create a new municipal department, a new municipal staff that would facilitate and basically administer this new building? Is that where we're going? Because, we write this stuff and it looks a little fuzzy. So just to be kind of clear on it. So, Polly, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for those questions, because I do think those things are on people's mind. And we always had a housing first approach. We still have a housing first approach, but in Chatham-Kent, like many communities, there is not enough housing to put people in, and there's not necessarily the right services or enough of the services. There's despite all the efforts going on. So we're like other communities that have had to look at an emergency housing model when we had never wanted to do that. Now we have been doing this since we opened the Bradley Center in April 2020. And we have had, we do have a number of casual, full-time casual temporary staff, and they have been a real blessing to this community. They are caring community members that do excellent work. Then in September, we opened Chatham. So we began actually with redeployed staff, and then we moved into hiring when we moved in September to the Travel Lodge. So we do have that staff now. We are looking at a new model, and it really depends on what kind of buildings or what's available in the community. So we're doing an environmental scan. So I don't know what that's going to look like. I'm not sure exactly how many municipal staff we will need. And because the landscape in the pandemic has changed everything so much, it is very difficult to sort of have a set plan and then stick to it. Because we can't just go anywhere. We can't, you know, I have no secret perfect plan in place. Every day we are looking at new options and evaluating new models based on the landscape that we're facing. But whatever we do, we will be coming back here and we'll be talking to the community.
And through you, Mayor Kemp, thank you, Polly. Just additionally, so I think, you know, it's kind of hard to navigate through this conversation, but are we now, like, through this motion, are we looking to buy land, or maybe maybe the municipality already owns land, so there's that. But would we be establishing a permanent bricks and mortar homeless shelter in Chatham-Kent, run by presumably municipal staff? Well, not presumably, because that's a question. So that is my question. Are we going to go from where we are today and where we've been for a long time of, and I'm sorry, you had the right term for it. I say graduated housing, but I apologize because you've got the right way to say that. But are we now looking to establish a permanent bricks and mortar homeless shelter in Chatham-Kent? Pretty simple question, which would be run by the municipality, which further, would that be a new department developed by this new endeavor? Because obviously we would need a director, and then we would have to get a coordinator, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. Staff would increase. So I think you know where I'm going with this. So, and I thank you, Mayor Kenneth, for Polly. Thank you.
So Mayor Caniff, it's April Reed-Dyke, General Manager, Community Human Services. I think I'm going to step in here. I think the answer, Councillor Bondi, thank you for the question, is no. We are looking at and continuing to focus on a housing first model. We will continue to work to house people as quickly as possible. The issue that we are presenting here today is the fact that we still have significant numbers of individuals in Chatham-Kent that are homeless. And our goal really should be to build, frankly, as quickly as possible, whether that is us doing that, private developers doing that, nonprofits doing that, affordable housing, so we can move people as quickly as possible from homelessness, whatever that means to them, into suitable housing, no matter what their income is, so that they have a place to call home. What we need, though, in that space is a temporary emergency housing solution. So Polly's indicated already that we only have the Travel Lodge until May, and we have to find somewhere else for well over, you know, close to 100 people every night for them to sleep and have a safe place to stay, until we can continue to work with the community to look at transitional housing, to look at supportive housing. And it's almost that all of those things have to catch up first once we have all those things in place, we hope we can go right back to what we were doing before, that we use some motels. We have some folks in, as you indicated, some of the hotels on Grand, while we await, and our whole team works with them to find appropriate housing. We have no plans to form another division or department or hire another director or any of those things. So I don't know if that helps answer your question or not. I think what we're looking at is we have a serious homelessness problem. I think we've articulated that very, very well this evening. We have to have some things in place that are going to take a bit longer to get in place. Things like indwell, things like other supportive housing. Those things are going to take a number of years, but in the interim, we have to have a place for people to stay and sleep and be safe. So I'll stop there. Hopefully that has answered your question. Does that help?
Through you, Mayor Kenneth. Yes, Dr. Reddick, it does. Thank you very much for that. My question was, and you answered it, and the answer was no. The answer was that no, we are not going to endeavor to build a homeless shelter, which other communities like London, which again, you know, I worked at as a university kid. So that's not the plan. And that's really, and I'm not for or against it. You know, I think maybe a homeless shelter might be a good idea here. I don't know if it is. It requires much more investigation than we're going to have this evening. But that's my concern, is that that's not what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about an interim plan to afford people the rights and the things that they should have. My concern is when I read the recommendation is that administration review current available buildings, including municipally owned buildings and or land, and provide a report to council on the feasibility of converting one to provide emergency shelter space. So again, I'm okay with, well, not necessarily, but I just want to be clear that we tonight as a council are not giving a green light to building a homeless shelter. If that's the case, let's just put it out there and say that's what we're doing, and then we can vote on that, and you know, we can make that decision. I just find some of this is a little kind of in between the lines, and I hope that you've cleared that up for us, and that no, that is not what we're doing, and we're only trying to find a temporary place to house people that are in need of emergency assistance until we can afford them proper housing. But we are not, you know, asking, or sorry, administration is not asking council to move ahead with a permanent homeless shelter. If that's the case, that's fine. We can vote on that. But if that's not the case, let's just be clear about it. Okay, like I'm not the smartest guy in the room, so you know, I just need some clarification. So if that's clear.
Yeah. If I can jump in, thank you, Mayor Kenneth, Councillor Bondi. I think the word that you're tossing around that is creating even maybe some of the confusion for you is that word permanent, right? We need to have somewhere for people to go, and we need that pretty quickly. So that might be, we've got to look at converting in this interim time, a municipal building. It might look at having someone come forward, even if they are going to build something that is in this interim time. Hopefully, if we were to convert something or build anything, or somebody was to do that, we would have the ability to then transition that into transitional housing or supportive housing, bring in a organization like Indwell. Any number of options are there. but I think you've put in sometimes the word permanent and sometimes not. So right now we need somewhere. We need to have an emergency shelter space to get us through until there's enough housing. So I support, it's not a permanent thing. We are a housing first community, and we will continue to be a housing first community. And so I hope that's cleared it up. I think if not, we'll see how we can address it. But I think this is very clear. We're saying we need to go and look. We need somewhere to go. We need to look at lands and buildings to see about emergency shelter space. We would like an external agency to assist with that, and we'd like some startup funding to get them working on that, to provide some really focused outreach services. And we want to engage in the community. We want to talk to the community. What would they like to see happen around homelessness? Because we're all hearing it. Every one of you has probably contacted me about homelessness and what can we do about that? How can we help? We want to hear what the community and some of the ideas that they might have in terms of assisting. These are our Chatham-Kent residents, and we need to help them. We need to provide a safe space. We need to provide services and hopefully get them on the path to really finding a place to call their own. So I'll stop there. I hope I've answered that for you, Councillor Bondi.
Well, almost, and thank you through you, Mayor Caniff. And April, I have called on you and your team have done an incredible job. As you will recall, I've had a couple of different friends that have run into some trouble, and you and your team have stepped up, saved the day within hours. It's commendable, applaudable, really. But my question is, and again, just very clearly, are we looking, and it's okay because council will have to make that decision one way or the other eventually. But are we moving to a permanent homeless shelter, very similar to the one that's in London, Ontario, Windsor, obviously Toronto's got, several. Is that where we're going, or are we going to continue with the model that we've had for years of not doing that? No bricks and mortar, no municipal staff, kind of the Grand Avenue Hotel thing. So that's the question. And again, I'm not opposed to it. I'm just trying to be clear. Are we looking towards, and when I read about looking at land and buildings, is that where we're going? Because I think that's fair that council and the public know that, yeah, we are kind of, we're drifting into the point, not the point necessarily, but we're going to the place where we're going to have a permanent, you may want to call it a transitionary place where people go and then we find them permanent housing, but a permanent building, because that's what we don't have now. And so that would be a big change. It would be a transition as to where we are. So the question is simply, are we looking to have a municipally owned and operated homeless shelter? Yes or no?
That's very good. Go ahead. Yeah, can you answer no to that, or yes, or?
Thank
I
you.
think you've already answered no a couple times, but.
I have tried to answer this question multiple times. I'm not sure I have anything more to add. We are running out of hotel spaces. The hotels are full. We don't have capacity. We will, and I will say it again, our contract at the Travel Lodge is ending. We have close to 100 people that we have nowhere to put them because there is not enough housing in our community. And we need to have somewhere to provide emergency shelter space in that interim until housing catches up. That does not mean that we want to be in the business of running, operating, having an emergency shelter forever. No, that's not going to happen. But right now, we need somewhere for people to go. So I think I don't think I can add any more to this, Mayor Caniff.
All right, thanks, Ms. Reitag. To summarize, the report's going to come back. We don't want to change where we're going with this, but circumstances could change. We need to house people. That's the bottom line here. So I guess with that, is there any other questions you have, Councillor Bondi, or can I move on to Councillor Latimer?
No, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks. All right, Councillor Latimer.
Thank you through the mayor. April, thank you very much for very clearly stating that we remain a housing first community. And unlike Councillor Bondi, I have no problem with number one. It says you're bringing back a report to us about if you're reviewing current available buildings and also land that could possibly be converted to provide emergency or immediate shelter space. It does not say permanent. And I fully agree with the approach that we have an obligation to house the residents of Chatham-Kent who are most vulnerable. And I fully agree with we may well get a report back that says whatever we're going to use or we're going to build through a third party or not, that once our available housing options increase or improve with regard to transitional, supportive, and or affordable, that whatever we're using for immediate emergency shelter space could be converted to transitional housing, which will always be required because you're always going to have people who are beyond care or who, for some reason, for whatever reason, get lost in that river and bypass the nets, bypass the dam, and we have to throw the life ring out too. And so I very much appreciate this recommendation, and I will remain in full support of it.
All right, seeing no other questions, we'll put it to vote.
Waiting for one more, council. All votes are in. Motion passes 13-3.
We'll move on now to non-agenda business. Councillor B. McGregor.
Thanks, Mayor Caniff. I had a question for Dr. Reitag. Had some residents reach out via social media and email looking for some clarification around the availability of rapid COVID tests in Chatham-Kent. So I know there's been some provincial announcements around availability in the LCBO, and that's not something we've seen in Chatham-Kent. And there were some questions over jurisdiction and is the health unit involved in that? Who decides where these tests go, and some frustration over not having them in Chatham, and just wanted to make sure we could clarify who's in charge of that side of things and what the role of CK Public Health is.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Thank you, Councillor McGregor, for that question. We certainly have not seen rapid antigen tests, the free ones that the government announced, come to Chatham-Kent. Health units, CK Public Health for sure was not consulted in the distribution of those free kits. The website, we do have links on our website that will take you to where the distribution sites are. The closest distribution site to Chatham-Kent is in Windsor. They do have a number of openings that are on the site for this coming week, if you would like to travel to Windsor to pick up kits. The website with the ministry is also indicating that all of the kits that were distributed to the LCBO have already been distributed, so they're already gone. So our hope is, certainly while we were not part of this rollout, that in future we will be able to, one, advocate for kits to come to Chatham-Kent, and two, be able to have some say in where those locations are, if the government's going to continue to be providing free rapid antigen kits across the province. So that's all the information I have, Councillor McGregor, at this time, and keep watch of our website, and we'll keep connecting people to the links as the province continues to roll this out.
Thank you, and appreciate that. And I know that those announcements came shortly after our Board of Health meeting. Otherwise, that's likely a place where that question belonged. And you know, I certainly understand the frustration of some residents in the community to, despite the really tireless advocacy of our public health unit in getting vaccination going and in accessing testing, it does seem that rural and remote communities, northern communities included, seem to be the last that get to access services at times. And I think that's a provincial frustration, and I want to make sure that residents that are frustrated by that trend are directing that frustration away from the folks at the health unit and towards those that should be receiving that feedback. Thank you.
Councillor Harrigan, followed by Councillor OJ.
Thank you, Mayor Kenneth. I just wanted to note that typically my background is some location in my corner of the municipality that I'd like to highlight in Ward 1, but I felt it was really important today to locate myself at the vaccination clinic with this background, and I hope that all of the residents and families in Chatham-Kent also consider to take a walk through that vaccine clinic, either for their first, second, or third shots of COVID-19. I think that, you know, we have some daunting numbers ahead of us, and getting our vaccine is a great way for us to protect ourselves and protect the community members around us. So I just wanted to share that in public forum. Thank you.
Councillor Oche, followed by Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, Your Worship. I actually just have I have a question for April as well. April, I have a business asking me about the test. Now, are they available to businesses, or they're not available, period, right now?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. That's a great question, Councillor Ochi. I'm actually glad you asked that. So on the ministry website, and you can get to that website through CKPHU website, ckphu.com. It will link to the space for all eligible businesses to receive those free rapid antigen tests. It's pretty limited, I'll put that out there, but certainly any business, if they are interested, I would recommend they go online, get on that provincial website, and see if they qualify, and then ask those questions to the province.
Thank you very much for that. And secondly, I'd just like to bring up, not for you, April, but just overall, a great thank you to Chatham Goodfellows, Tilbury Goodfellows, Merlin Community Assistance, Salvation Army, and I know I'm missing a lot of probably other Goodfellows or other people that also give out baskets during this season. I know there's been a huge need this year, and it was just good to see so many great things being said about them. And I know most people do appreciate it, and I just want to thank everyone that had anything to do with it, volunteers, whether you're at a kettle or you're at selling paper or porch pickup or filling the baskets or delivering the baskets, taking the applications, whatever. Thank you very much to everyone in the community who helps out in any way whatsoever doing this. I know it's much needed at this time, especially the last couple of years. So once again, thanks very much.
Councillor Stakachi.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff, and through you, Your Worship. My first question was answered by Dr. Reed-Ike. That was from Mr. Oche in regard to the testing for businesses. My second one, Dr. Reed-Ike, I've had some healthcare workers reach out to me in regards to the initial the initial directive was the 6 months, and they were waiting for that time period, and then it has changed in regards to how long between shots, and there's some healthcare workers that reached out to me in regards to, is there going to be some time slots available for people that are working in high risk settings and for people that are in high settings, now that basically the bookings has kind of increased substantially. And I'm just curious to see if any people that are working in those high risk settings, there's going to be some time slots prioritized for them, or is it just going to be now fill at at your earliest convenience?
Thank you, Mary Caniff. Thank you, Councillor Oche, for that. A couple of things. So certainly, very quickly, it was announced, everyone is aware of that the provincial government has decreased that interval between the second dose of COVID vaccine and the booster from 6 months down to 3 months. Healthcare workers have been able to be boosted for quite some time, and we had lots and lots and lots of available spaces. So one, it's unfortunate they didn't take advantage of that. Then the age came into play with the over 70-year-olds, then the over 50-year-olds, now the over 18-year-olds. And part of that is really looking at getting as many people boosted as quickly as possible in order to really fight the Omicron variant. So what I would recommend to anyone trying to book their booster dose or their first or second, if they haven't been vaccinated yet, or for their children, is to get online, register with the Perfect Mind system, and start going through those clinic times and get yourself booked into a clinic as soon as possible. So there are no longer are there specific appointments to specifically answer your question. There are not designated appointments, but those appointments are available for booking in certainly the coming weeks. So online, super easy to do once you navigate through that beginning Perfect Mind scenario, and then people should be able to pick a time that suits them. Thanks.
Thank you. And my last question for you, I know that the public health has been fantastic on social media in addressing this, but I did have some people reach out that I've shared your social media posts in regards to the vaccines that weren't shipped. I just wanted to give you a brief platform just to speak on the ability to mix the two different vaccines and the importance of getting vaccinated despite the shortage that we've been sent this week.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Caniff. We have certainly been given direction both from the province and from Dr. Colby, who is very supportive of, I want to say, mixing and matching of vaccine. So we actually have some research coming out, albeit preliminary and small, that is actually showing mixed vaccines are getting some great kind of outcomes in terms of protection against COVID. So Moderna and Pfizer are certainly interchangeable in terms of vaccines. So there's no worries around whether or not you received Pfizer first and Moderna second. The same goes, it was brought to my attention today, actually, what about the people who had AstraZeneca? So we do have some folks that will have had dose 1 of AstraZeneca, dose 2 of Pfizer, and now dose 3 of Moderna. And we are recommending wholeheartedly that people still go out and get boosted with whatever vaccine is available to them. That is the safest, best option right now that we have. So I hope that helps, Councillor Sakachi.
Absolutely. Just thought it was important to give you a brief opportunity to explain that and the importance of still moving forward. Thank you, Dr. Riedijk.
Councillor Finn.
I just wanted to touch a little bit further on Councillor O'Shea's thanking of all the Christmas hamper programs. I'd like to thank everybody who traveled down 5th Street during the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday hustle of trying to remove boxes out of the Sears building. They were quite generous and very thoughtful in letting vehicles pull out of there. That's it.
Mayor Caniff, you're muted.
What, you can't hear me when I'm muted? We'll move on to first and second reading. Councillor Solomon and Councillor Pincinel, can you move that, please?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd be pleased to move that.
And I'll second that, Your Worship.
Excellent. Anyone opposed? None opposed. Motion carried. The third and final reading. Councillor Foss and Councillor Sakachi.
So move, Your Worship.
Happy to second, Mayor Caniff.
Anyone opposed? Motion carried. We'll move on to Councillor Hall for the resolution of council, and we'll have Councillor Wright wrap it up for us.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I move that Chatham-Kent Council adjourn to its next meeting to be held on Monday, January 17th, 2022, and that Chatham-Kent Council authorize itself to meet in closed session on that day to discuss any matters permitted by the Municipal Act.
Councillor, perfect. Anyone opposed to wrapping it up at 9:12? Hearing none, I want to wish everyone a fantastic holiday season, and we got a couple weeks off, so enjoy it, and we'll see everybody soon.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.